I never told my husband about my hidden $50,000, and that silence became the thread that unraveled everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the people we trust most in this world. My name is Rebecca Walsh, and I'm 34 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a modest apartment with cream-colored walls and second-hand furniture that I've carefully arranged to look intentional rather than desperate. Every morning, I wake up at 5:30, make coffee in a French press I bought at a thrift store for $3, and stare at my reflection in the bathroom mirror while the city outside is still sleeping. The woman looking back at me has learned to wear exhaustion like jewelry, subtle, always present, but easy to overlook if you're not paying attention. I work as a medical billing specialist at a mid-sized clinic downtown. It's the kind of job that pays just enough to keep you afloat but never enough to actually swim. My co-workers are kind people with their own struggles, their own secrets folded into brown bag lunches and forced smiles during staff meetings. I've been there for 6 years, and in that time, I've become invisible in the way that reliable people often do. I show up, I do the work, I go home. Nobody asks too many questions, and I prefer it that way. But here's what nobody knows, not even my husband of 3 years, Daniel Walsh. I have $50,000 sitting in an account that only I can access. $50,000 that I saved penny by penny, sacrifice by sacrifice, over the course of a decade. It started when I was 24, working 2 jobs and living in a studio apartment where the heating barely worked in winter. I watched my mother struggle her entire life, watched her depend on my father for everything until he left and she had nothing, no education she could leverage, no savings, no safety net. She ended up living with my aunt in a converted garage, working retail until her knees gave out. I promised myself I would never be that vulnerable, never be that trapped. So I started saving. $5 here, $20 there. I took every overtime shift I could get. I sold things I didn't need. I learned to cook elaborate meals from cheap ingredients, learned to cut my own hair, learned to say no to brunches and happy hours and weekend trips that would drain my account. My friends thought I was just frugal. My family thought I was boring. Nobody understood that I was building something, a foundation, a future, a way out if I ever needed one. And then I met Daniel. If you've ever fallen in love with someone who seemed too good to be true, you know exactly how I felt in that moment when he first smiled at me across the produce section at the grocery store, holding a cantaloupe like he had no idea what to do with it. He was handsome in an understated way, dark blonde hair that fell slightly over his forehead, hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, a jawline that suggested he'd been athletic once but had softened into something more approachable. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and when he asked me how to tell if a melon was ripe, his voice was warm and self-deprecating. Before I leave this chapter, let me say something. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world where you've ever felt like you had to hide parts of yourself to be loved, drop a comment and let me know where you're from. I want to know I'm not alone in this. And please, hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you gets darker than you can imagine. There are more stories like mine in the description box below, stories about betrayal, survival, and the masks we wear for the people we love. Check them out when you're done here. We started dating 2 weeks after that grocery store encounter. Daniel was a project manager for a construction company, or at least that's what he told me. He had a decent truck, a small house in the suburbs that he was renting with an option to buy, and an easygoing demeanor that made me feel safe in a way I hadn't felt since I was a child. He didn't flash money or make grand gestures. He brought me wildflowers he picked from the side of the road. He cooked me dinner, badly, but with such genuine effort that I fell a little more in love with each overcooked chicken breast. What I loved most was that he never asked me for anything. He never pressured me to move faster than I wanted. When I told him I preferred to split bills, he didn't act insulted or emasculated. He just nodded and said, "Whatever makes you comfortable, Becca." That's what he called me from the beginning. Becca, not Rebecca. It felt intimate, like he was creating a version of me that belonged only to him. We got married on a rainy Saturday in October, 3 years ago. It was a small ceremony at the courthouse with just a handful of friends. I wore a cream-colored dress I found on sale, and he wore the same navy suit he'd worn to every formal event since college. We honeymooned by driving down the coast, staying in cheap motels and eating fish and chips on the beach while the Pacific wind whipped around us. It was perfect in its simplicity, and I remember thinking, this is it. This is the life I was saving for. But here's the thing about secrets, they have weight. They take up space even when nobody else can see them. Every time Daniel complained about money, every time he stressed about an unexpected expense or talked about how we needed to be more careful with our budget, I felt that $50,000 pressing against my chest like a stone. I wanted to tell him. God, there were nights when I lay awake, listening to him breathe beside me, and I nearly said the words out loud, I have money. I have savings. We're not as stuck as you think we are. But I never did. Because what if telling him changed things? What if he started to see me differently, not as his equal, his partner, but as someone who had been lying to him all along? What if it shifted the dynamic between us in ways I couldn't predict or control? Worse, what if he expected me to spend it, to solve our problems with money that I had earned through years of sacrifice? That money wasn't for everyday emergencies. It was for catastrophic ones. It was for survival, not comfort. So I kept quiet, and I watched him struggle, and I hated myself a little more each day. Daniel never introduced me to his parents. In 3 years of marriage, I'd never met them, never even spoken to them on the phone. He said they lived in Seattle, that they were difficult, that he preferred to keep that part of his life separate. I didn't push. I figured everyone had complicated family dynamics, and if he needed space from them, I could respect that. Besides, my own family situation was far from perfect. My father was gone, my mother was barely scraping by, and my younger brother, Tyler, was in and out of rehab for the 3rd time. I wasn't exactly eager to drag Daniel into that mess either. But then, 2 months ago, something shifted. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, watching some forgettable crime show, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I saw his face change, just for a second, just a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Tension, maybe, or fear. He stood up, said, I need to take this, and walked into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. I heard his voice through the wall, muffled but urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was wrong. Apologetic. Defensive. When he came back 15 minutes later, his smile was too bright, his shoulders too stiff. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, fine, he said, sitting back down beside me and reaching for my hand. Just work stuff. But his palm was sweaty, and he didn't look at me when he spoke. 2 weeks later, he brought it up over breakfast. We were eating scrambled eggs and toast at our tiny kitchen table, the morning light streaming through the window and illuminating the dust motes floating between us. He cleared his throat, pushed his eggs around his plate, and said, So, my parents want to meet you. I looked up, surprised. Really? After all this time? He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. They're coming down to Portland for a few days. They want to take us out to dinner. Nothing fancy, just, a chance to finally meet. Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. Do you want me to meet them? Of course I do, he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. I need to warn you. They can be a bit judgmental. Especially my mom. She has opinions about everything, and she's not shy about sharing them. Okay, I said slowly. What kind of opinions? He hesitated, and in that pause, I felt the ground shift beneath me. They think I married too quickly. They think I should have waited, been more strategic. And they don't really understand why I chose to live the way we do, modestly, I mean. They expected me to have more by now. More what? More success. More money. A bigger house. Nicer cars. The whole suburban dream thing. He finally looked at me, and there was something desperate in his gaze. They're going to judge you, Becca. I'm sorry, but they are. They're going to look at your clothes, your job, the way you talk, and they're going to make assumptions. I just want you to be prepared. I set down my fork, my appetite suddenly gone. What kind of assumptions? He sighed. That you're not good enough. That you married me for. I don't know, stability or something. They're going to think you're beneath me. The words hung in the air between us, sharp and ugly. I wanted to be angry, but instead I just felt cold. And what do you think? I think you're the best thing that ever happened to me, he said quickly, reaching across the table to grab my hand. I think they're wrong about everything. But I also think, I don't know, maybe it would be easier if you just played it down a bit. At dinner, I mean. Don't try to impress them. Just be yourself, but maybe quieter, more reserved. Let them think whatever they want to think. I pulled my hand back. You want me to pretend to be less than I am so your parents will feel superior? No, that's not what He stopped, rubbed his face with both hands. I just don't want this to be a battle, okay? I don't want you to get hurt. If they think you're naive, if they think you're struggling, they'll be condescending, but at least they won't be cruel. If they think you're trying too hard, they'll tear you apart. I stared at him, this man I had married, this man I had trusted with my life if not my secrets, and I realized I didn't know him at all. Or maybe I did, and that was worse. When's the dinner? I asked quietly. Next Saturday. 7 o'clock. There's a steakhouse downtown they want to try. I nodded, already planning, already calculating. Okay. I'll be there. He smiled, relieved, and leaned over to kiss my forehead. Thank you, Becca. I know this isn't fair, but thank you. As he stood up to clear the dishes, I sat there in the morning light, thinking about that $50,000. Thinking about the woman I'd worked so hard to become, independent, careful, prepared. And I thought about the woman Daniel wanted me to pretend to be, small, simple, beneath notice. And then I thought, what if I gave them exactly what they expected? What if I walked into that dinner as the poor, naive wife they assumed I was, and watched to see how they treated me? What if I used their cruelty to learn the truth about the family I'd married into, about the man I'd chosen to spend my life with? What if I set a trap, and they walked right into it? I never told my husband about my hidden $50,000 because I wanted to see who he really was when he thought I had nothing. And what I discovered at that dinner changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, I had to prepare. I had to become someone I wasn't, someone small and grateful and unaware of her own worth. I had to study the part like an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime. Because this wasn't just dinner. This was a test. And I intended to pass. The days leading up to that dinner felt like falling down a staircase in slow motion. Each morning I woke up knowing I was one step closer to something I couldn't quite name. Revelation, disaster, truth. I went through the motions of my regular life, billing insurance claims and eating lunch at my desk, but my mind was elsewhere, building a character, constructing a persona that would reveal more than it concealed. I started with my wardrobe. Daniel and I shared a closet in our small apartment, and my section was modest but respectable. Work blouses from Target, jeans from Old Navy, a few dresses I'd collected over the years for weddings and special occasions. Nothing expensive, but nothing embarrassing either. I dressed like someone who was making it work on a tight budget, which was exactly what I wanted people to believe. But for this dinner, I needed to go further. I needed to look like someone who was drowning, not treading water. On Tuesday, I went to Goodwill during my lunch break. The store smelled like dust and other people's memories, and I felt a pang of nostalgia for the years when I'd shopped here out of necessity rather than strategy. I walked past the racks of clothing, running my fingers over fabric that had been worn by strangers, and I selected carefully, a navy blue dress with a dated cut, slightly too large in the shoulders. A cardigan with pilling at the elbows. Shoes that were sensible to the point of dowdy, with scuffed toes that I wouldn't bother to polish. The woman at the register was probably in her 60s, with kind eyes and hands that moved slowly as she folded my purchases. "These are nice choices," she said, and I wondered what story she was imagining about me. What kind of life did she think I led? "Thank you," I said, paying in cash, and I left the store feeling like I'd just stolen something valuable. That evening, I tried everything on in front of the bathroom mirror while Daniel was working late. The dress hung on me in all the wrong ways, making my figure disappear into shapeless fabric. The cardigan added years to my appearance. The shoes were clunky and graceless. I pulled my hair back into a severe ponytail, skipped the makeup I usually wore, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. She looked tired, defeated, like she'd given up on being seen as anything other than functional. She looked like someone who'd never had $50,000, someone who'd never had a plan or a dream beyond survival. She looked exactly like what Daniel's parents would expect. I took a photo with my phone, studied it for a long moment, then deleted it. I didn't need a reminder of what I was about to become. I just needed to commit it to memory. Over the next few days, I refined the performance. I practiced speaking more softly, more hesitantly, as if I wasn't sure my opinions mattered. I practiced smiling in that apologetic way that women learn when they've been taught to take up less space. I watched myself in every reflective surface, store windows, the screen of my computer when it went dark, the side mirror of my car, and I adjusted, fine-tuned, perfected. Daniel noticed something was different, but he couldn't put his finger on what. "You seem quiet," he said on Thursday night as we ate dinner in front of the television, spaghetti with jarred sauce, garlic bread from the freezer section. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice soft. "Just thinking about Saturday." He reached over and squeezed my knee. "It's going to be fine, Becca. Just be yourself." I almost laughed. Be yourself. As if he had any idea who that was. "What should I wear?" I asked, even though I'd already decided. He shrugged. "Something nice but not too nice. You know, casual. My parents appreciate humility." Humility. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "Okay," I said. "I have something that'll work. If you're still watching, I need you to do something for me. I need you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because what happens next is going to make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and the masks we wear. There are more stories like this one in the description box below, stories about people who discovered the truth the hard way. Go check them out, but come back here, because you need to hear how this ends. On Friday, I did something I hadn't done in months. I checked my secret account. I logged in from a coffee shop downtown during my lunch break. Using the public Wi-Fi and a browser window, I delete the history from immediately afterward. The balance glowed on the screen, $50,347.82. Interest had been adding up slowly over the years, a few dollars at a time, proof that patience and discipline could build something real. I stared at that number and felt a complicated surge of emotions: pride, guilt, fear, power. This money represented every choice I'd made to protect myself, every sacrifice I'd made to ensure I'd never be trapped. But it also represented every lie I'd told Daniel, every moment I'd let him believe we were struggling more than we actually were. Not that we weren't struggling. Even with my secret savings, our day-to-day life was tight. Daniel's income was inconsistent, construction projects came and went, and some months were better than others. I covered most of our regular expenses with my steady paycheck, and we lived carefully, avoiding debt and unnecessary purchases. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We existed in that middle space where one big emergency could tip everything into chaos. Except I had a safety net. And he didn't know it. I logged out, cleared the browser history, and sat there for a long time, watching people come and go from the coffee shop. Young professionals with expensive laptops and designer handbags. College students with their textbooks spread across tables, surviving on caffeine and ambition. Retired couples sharing a pastry, their hands linked across the table like they'd been holding on to each other for decades. What would Daniel do if he knew about the money? Would he be angry that I'd hidden it? Relieved that we had a cushion? Would he see it as a betrayal or a gift? And what would his parents think? Would they respect me more, knowing I'd been careful and strategic, or would they see it as proof that I'd been calculating all along, that I'd married their son with ulterior motives? I realized, sitting there with my cold coffee and my racing thoughts, that I didn't care what they thought. I cared what their reaction would reveal about who they really were. And I cared what Daniel would do when he saw how they treated the woman he supposedly loved. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to him breathe, and I ran through scenarios in my mind. What if his parents were kind? What if they welcomed me with open arms, despite their supposed reservations, and I'd gotten dressed up in my Goodwill costume for nothing? What if this whole plan was based on paranoia and insecurity, and I was about to humiliate myself for no reason? But then I remembered the look on Daniel's face when he'd warned me about them. The tension in his voice. The way he told me to play small, to be quiet, to let them think I was beneath him. He'd been protecting them, not me. And that told me everything I needed to know. Saturday arrived with grey skies and a light drizzle that made the city look washed out and tired. I spent the morning cleaning the apartment, scrubbing the kitchen until my hands smelled like bleach, vacuuming every corner even though no one was coming over. Daniel watched me from the couch, scrolling through his phone with a distracted expression. "You're nervous," he said around noon. "A little," I admitted, though nervous didn't begin to cover it. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into water I couldn't see the bottom of. "It's going to be fine," he said again, like a mantra. "They're just people, Becca. Just my parents." But the way he said it made me think he was trying to convince himself more than me. At 5 o'clock, I started getting ready. I showered, dried my hair but didn't style it, left my face bare except for a touch of lip balm. I put on the Goodwill dress, the pilled cardigan, the scuffed shoes. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who'd been beaten down by life, someone who'd learned to accept whatever scraps were offered and be grateful for them. Perfect. Daniel knocked on the bathroom door. "Ready?" "Almost," I called back. I took one last look at my reflection, memorizing this version of myself, and then I opened the door. He blinked, surprised. "Is that what you're wearing?" "You said casual," I replied, keeping my voice light. "Is it okay?" He hesitated, and I saw him struggling with something, disappointment, maybe, or embarrassment. But then he forced a smile. "Yeah, it's fine. You look nice." Nice. The word felt like a hand pushing me underwater. We drove to the restaurant in silence, the windshield wipers squeaking against the drizzle. Daniel's hands were tight on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. I wanted to reach over and touch his arm, to ask him what he was really afraid of, but I kept my hands folded in my lap and watched the city slide past. The steakhouse was in a part of downtown I rarely visited, upscale, the kind of place where the waiters wore ties and the menus didn't list prices. Daniel pulled up to the valet stand, and I saw his shoulders tense even more as he handed over the keys to his aging truck. The valet, a young guy probably working his way through college, gave the truck a barely perceptible look of disdain before driving it away. Inside, the restaurant was all dark wood and leather booths, soft lighting that made everyone look like they were in a movie about wealthy people with complicated problems. The host greeted us with a professional smile and led us through the maze of tables toward the back, where I could see two people already seated, watching our approach. Daniel's parents. Even from a distance, I could tell they were exactly what I'd expected. His father was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and a face that suggested he'd been handsome once but had hardened into something more severe. He wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and his watch caught the light as he lifted his wine glass. His mother was smaller, more delicate, with blonde hair styled in that timeless way that wealthy women perfect, not too young, not too old, just expensive. She wore a cream-colored blouse with a silk scarf draped artfully around her neck, and her jewelry was subtle but unmistakably real. Pearls at her ears, a diamond on her finger that could probably feed a family for a month. They both looked up as we approached, and I saw their eyes move over me in one quick, assessing sweep. I saw his mother's expression flicker, surprise, disappointment, something else I couldn't quite name. Satisfaction. Maybe. As if I'd confirmed every assumption she'd already made. Daniel kissed his mother's cheek, shook his father's hand, then turned to me. "Mom, Dad, this is my wife, Rebecca. Becca, these are my parents, Richard and Patricia Walsh." I stepped forward, extending my hand with a smile I'd practiced to be warm but not confident. "It's so wonderful to finally meet you both." Patricia took my hand briefly, her grip limp and dismissive. "Yes, it's been quite a while, hasn't it?" Her voice was cool, measured, with an accent that suggested expensive boarding schools and summers abroad. "Daniel has told us so much about you." I doubted that very much, but I kept smiling. "All good things, I hope." Richard didn't offer his hand, just nodded in my direction. "Please, sit." And so it began. I slid into the booth beside Daniel, and as I settled into my seat, smoothing down my dated dress and adjusting my threadbare cardigan, I could feel Patricia's eyes on me. Calculating, judging, testing. And I thought, let the games begin. The first few minutes at that table felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Every word, every gesture, every pause carried weight I couldn't fully measure. I watched Patricia Walsh's eyes travel over my outfit again, lingering on the cardigan's pilled elbows, the dress's unflattering cut, the absence of jewelry except for my plain wedding band. I saw her exchange a glance with Richard, something quick and loaded with meaning. They didn't even try to hide it. The waiter appeared with menus bound in leather, the kind without prices that tell you everything costs more than you want to know. Daniel tensed beside me as I opened mine, and I made a show of studying it carefully, my eyes widening slightly at the descriptions: dry-aged rib-eye, butter-poached lobster tail, truffle risotto. The kind of food I'd eaten maybe twice in my life, and both times had been at someone else's expense. "The fillet is excellent here," Patricia said, her tone suggesting she wasn't making a recommendation so much as issuing an instruction. "Richard and I come here whenever we're in Portland. The chef trained in France." "That sounds lovely," I said, keeping my voice soft, deferential. "Everything looks wonderful. I'm not sure what to choose." Daniel cleared his throat. "Maybe the chicken? That's usually a safe bet." I turned to look at him, and in that moment I saw something in his face that made my stomach clench. He was embarrassed. Not of his parents, but of me. He was already trying to manage the situation, to steer me toward the cheapest option on the menu, to minimize the damage of bringing his poor, unsophisticated wife to dinner with his cultured parents. "The chicken sounds perfect," I said, closing my menu and setting it aside. I clasped my hands on the table in front of me, making myself small, undemanding. Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Practical choice. That's good. Daniel, what about you?" The waiter took our orders. Patricia and Richard both ordered the fillet, rare, with sides that cost extra. Daniel ordered a steak too, medium rare, and I saw him not look at me as he did it. When the waiter asked about drinks, Richard ordered a bottle of wine without consulting any of us, something with a French name I didn't quite catch. The waiter nodded approvingly and disappeared. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Richard leaned back in his seat, studying me with an expression that was somewhere between curiosity and assessment, like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Patricia sipped her water, her lipstick leaving a perfect imprint on the glass. "So, Rebecca," Patricia began, and the way she used my full name felt deliberate, like she was refusing to acknowledge the intimacy of a nickname. "Daniel tells us you work in medical billing. That must be interesting." The pause before interesting told me everything I needed to know about what she really thought. "It's steady work," I replied, keeping my tone even. "I've been at the same clinic for 6 years. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills." "Stability is important," Richard said, though his tone suggested he found nothing admirable about it. "In this economy, I suppose any job is worth keeping." I nodded, letting the backhanded compliment hang in the air. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once. Whether in support or warning, I couldn't tell. "And where did you grow up, Rebecca?" Patricia asked, taking a small bite of the bread the waiter had delivered. She chewed delicately, like even eating required elegance. "Spokane," I said. "My mom still lives there. My dad left when I was 12, and she raised me and my brother on her own. She worked retail most of her life." I watched Patricia's expression shift ever so slightly, Not quite pity, not quite disdain, but something in between. Confirmation. Maybe. Evidence that I came from the kind of broken, working-class background she'd assumed. That must have been difficult, she said, in a tone that suggested she couldn't imagine anything more foreign to her own experience. It was, I admitted. But it taught me the value of hard work. My mom did everything she could to give us a good life. And your brother? Richard asked. What does he do? This was where it got tricky. I could lie, make up some respectable career for Tyler. But something told me they'd eventually find out the truth, and the lie would make everything worse. Besides, I was here to show them who I really was, or at least, who I wanted them to think I was. He's struggled, I said quietly, looking down at my hands. He's been in and out of rehab for addiction issues. Right now he's trying to get his life back on track, but it's been hard. The silence that followed felt like falling through ice. Patricia set down her bread, brushed imaginary crumbs from her fingers. Richard's face remained impassive, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. I'm sorry to hear that, Patricia said, in a voice that conveyed no actual sympathy. Addiction is such a complicated issue. It must be quite a strain on your family. It is, I agreed. But we do what we can to support him. We, she repeated, and her eyes flickered to Daniel. Does that include financial support? I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. This was it, the first real test. Would he defend me, or would he let her interrogate me like a hostile witness? Sometimes, I said before he could speak. When he needs help with things like rent or groceries. It's not ideal, but his family. Of course, Patricia said, but her tone said the opposite. It said, how convenient for him to have a brother-in-law with resources to drain. It said, I knew she came from the kind of family that would be a liability. The wine arrived, and Richard went through the ritual of tasting and approving it with the waiter. When everyone's glasses were filled, he raised his in a toast. To family, he said, and the irony wasn't lost on me. We clinked glasses, and I took a small sip. The wine was probably excellent, smooth, complex, the kind of thing people write poetry about. But it tasted bitter in my mouth. If you're watching this and you've ever sat at a table with people who made you feel like you weren't good enough, like you didn't belong, I need you to do something. I need you to leave a comment telling me I'm not crazy for what I did next. And please, subscribe if you haven't already, because this story is about to take a turn that will make you rethink everything you know about revenge and justice. Check the description box below for more stories about people who fought back against the people who underestimated them. Patricia leaned forward slightly, her expression taking on what I'm sure she thought was a caring demeanor. Rebecca, forgive me for being direct, but I think it's important for us to have an honest conversation. Daniel is our only son, and we've always wanted the best for him. When he told us he'd gotten married so quickly, without even introducing us to you first, we were concerned. Mom, Daniel said, warning in his voice. But it was weak, half-hearted. He wasn't really going to stop her. Patricia ignored him, her eyes locked on mine. We worry that he made an impulsive decision. That perhaps he was swept up in romance without considering the practical aspects of marriage. Financial compatibility, for instance. Similar backgrounds and values. These things matter in the long run. I felt my face heat up, not with shame but with anger I had to suppress. I forced myself to maintain the character I'd created, the naive, grateful wife who didn't understand she was being insulted. I understand your concern, I said softly. I know I'm not what you probably imagined for Daniel. I don't come from money, and I don't have a fancy degree or an impressive career. But I love your son, and I try every day to be a good wife to him. Love is important, Richard interjected, his voice heavy with skepticism. But it doesn't pay the bills. Daniel has mentioned that finances have been tight. That you're living in a small apartment, driving old cars, struggling to save for a house. That concerns us. Daniel's hand had gone completely still in mine. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't pushing back. He was just sitting there, letting his parents dissect our life together like forensic accountants examining a failed business. We're managing, I said. We don't have everything we want, but we have everything we need. We're building our life together slowly, carefully. But you could be doing better, Patricia said, and now there was an edge to her voice. If Daniel had made different choices. If he'd married someone with more resources. Someone who could contribute more significantly to their shared future. And there it was. The accusation hanging in the air, dressed up as concern. I was a burden. I was holding Daniel back. I was the reason he wasn't living up to their expectations. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, our food arrived. The waiter set plates in front of us with practiced precision, steaks for the three of them, perfectly seared and oozing juice, accompanied by roasted vegetables and creamy potatoes. My chicken breast sat in the center of my plate like an apology, plain and unadorned except for a sprig of parsley. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. We ate in relative silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of silverware against expensive china and the murmur of conversation from other tables. I cut my chicken into small bites, chewed carefully, kept my eyes on my plate. I could feel Patricia watching me, analyzing every move I made, every gesture, looking for proof that I was exactly the kind of person she decided I was. Richard was the one who broke the silence. Daniel tells us you've been married for 3 years now. Any plans for children? The question felt like a trap, but I wasn't sure which answer would spring it. We've talked about it, I said carefully. But we want to be in a better financial position first. Children are expensive, and we want to be able to provide for them properly. Patricia set down her fork with a soft clink. Sensible, I suppose. Though time isn't always on a woman's side when it comes to these decisions. You're what, 34? 35. 34, I confirmed, feeling the weight of her judgment in those numbers. She hummed, cutting into her steak. My grandmother used to say that poverty is often a choice. Not always, of course, but often. It's about mindset, about ambition. Some people are simply content with less. I felt Daniel shift beside me, finally showing some sign of discomfort. Mom, that's not really. I'm just saying, Patricia continued, waving her hand dismissively, that there are always opportunities for those willing to work hard and make smart decisions. Take Daniel, for instance. He could have stayed in construction management, but Richard offered him a position at his firm 3 years ago. Real estate development, significant salary increase, excellent benefits. But he turned it down. My head snapped toward Daniel so fast I heard my neck crack. What? He wouldn't meet my eyes. His face had gone pale, and he was staring at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. It wasn't the right time, he mumbled. Wasn't the right time. Richard's voice was sharp now, cutting. I offered you a 6-figure salary, son. An opportunity to learn the business, to eventually take over when I retire. And you said no because you wanted to find your own path or some such nonsense. I set down my fork carefully, my hands trembling slightly. Daniel, you never told me about this. It wasn't important, he said, still not looking at me. Not important. Patricia laughed, a cold, brittle sound. Rebecca, your husband turned down a job that would have doubled, no, tripled, your household income. You could have had a real house by now, not some cramped apartment. You could have had security, comfort. But Daniel's pride got in the way. The world tilted slightly. 3 years. For 3 years, I'd watched my husband stress about money, watched him come home exhausted from construction sites, watched him worry about whether we could afford to fix the truck when it broke down. And the entire time, there had been an escape route he'd never even mentioned to me. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would you turn that down? Daniel finally looked at me, and I saw something desperate in his eyes. Something like shame. Because I didn't want to work for him, he said, gesturing toward his father. I didn't want to spend my life doing what they wanted me to do, being who they wanted me to be. I wanted to build something on my own. Noble sentiments, Richard said dryly. But nobility doesn't pay the mortgage. And it certainly doesn't provide for a wife who clearly needs more than you're giving her. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Not just because Daniel had kept this massive secret from me, but because of what it revealed. He'd chosen pride over our financial security. He'd chosen his independence over our shared future. And he'd never even consulted me about it. But there was something else, something that made the situation even worse. The way his parents were talking about me, like I was a financial burden, a mistake, something Daniel needed to be rescued from, suggested they'd been having these conversations for a while. Behind my back, Daniel had been listening to his parents tear apart our life together, and he'd never defended me. Never shut it down. Never told me it was happening. Patricia leaned back in her seat, dabbing at her lips with her napkin. Rebecca, I hope you don't think we're being cruel. We're just concerned for Daniel's future. And by extension, yours. You seem like a sweet girl, but sweetness doesn't build wealth or security. Sometimes the kindest thing is to be honest about reality. And what reality is that? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. That you two are not well matched, she said simply. Daniel comes from a family of means, of ambition, of achievement. He was raised with certain expectations, certain standards. And while I'm sure you're doing your best with what you have, the truth is that your best isn't enough to give him the life he deserves. The rage that surged through me was so intense I had to grip the edge of the table to keep myself steady. But I didn't break character. I didn't lash out. Instead, I let my eyes fill with tears, real ones, born not of sadness but of fury, and I looked down at my lap. I know I'm not enough, I whispered, and I heard my voice crack in exactly the right way. I've always known that. I look at Daniel and I wonder what he sees in me, why he chose me when he could have had someone better. Someone from your world, who understands your life. I've tried so hard to be a good wife, but maybe you're right. Maybe I'm holding him back. I glanced up and saw something flash across Patricia's face. Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd broken me, put me in my place, made me understand that I was the problem. And Daniel, God, Daniel just sat there with his hand still in mine, saying nothing. Not disagreeing with his mother. Not defending me. Not doing anything except being complicit in my humiliation. Richard cleared his throat. No one is saying you're a bad person, Rebecca. We're simply suggesting that perhaps this marriage was premature. That perhaps both of you would be happier, more successful, with partners who are better suited to your respective circumstances. You want us to get divorced, I said, not as a question but as a statement. We want Daniel to have options, Patricia corrected. We want him to understand that he doesn't have to sacrifice his future out of some misguided sense of loyalty. Marriage is a partnership, and if one partner can't contribute equally. That's enough, Daniel finally said, and his voice had an edge I'd rarely heard. You've made your point. Can we please just finish dinner? But the damage was done. The truth was out, not just about the job offer, but about what Daniel's parents thought of me, how they'd been poisoning him against me, how they saw our marriage as a mistake that needed to be corrected. And the worst part? I'd known it would be bad, but I hadn't expected it to hurt this much. Even though I'd prepared for their cruelty, even though I'd come here specifically to see it in action, it still felt like being flayed alive. We finished the meal in near silence. Patricia and Richard made small talk about people I didn't know, places I'd never been, investments I couldn't afford. Daniel pushed food around his plate and avoided looking at anyone. I ate my chicken methodically, mechanically, tasting nothing. When the check came, Richard pulled out a credit card without even glancing at the total. "This one's on me," he said. "Consider it our treat for finally meeting our daughter-in-law." The word finally carried so much weight. Finally, after 3 years. Finally, because they'd probably demanded it. Finally, so they could confirm their worst suspicions about the woman their son had married. As we stood to leave, Patricia pulled me aside while the men walked ahead toward the valet stand. She placed a hand on my arm, her grip surprisingly firm, and leaned in close. Her perfume was expensive, something floral and complex, and it made me slightly nauseous. "Rebecca," she said quietly, her voice taking on a tone that might have been mistaken for kindness if you weren't listening carefully. "I'm going to give you some advice, woman to woman. You're still young. You could start over, find someone more appropriate to your station. Someone who won't expect more than you can give. Daniel deserves a partner who can match his potential, and you deserve a life where you're not constantly struggling to keep up. Think about it. Really think about whether holding on to this marriage is fair to either of you." She patted my arm twice, then walked away, leaving me standing there in the dim light of the restaurant, trembling with an emotion I couldn't quite name. The drive home was silent. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I stared out the window at the city lights blurring past, my mind racing through everything that had happened, everything that had been revealed. When we pulled into our apartment complex, Daniel finally spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. "They were worse than I expected." I turned to look at him. "Were they?" "Because it seemed like exactly what you prepared me for. Small, naive Rebecca, not good enough for the Walsh family dynasty." "That's not fair," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You know what's not fair," I said, my voice rising. "Not telling me about the job offer. Letting me think we were struggling because we had no choice, when the whole time you could have made one phone call and changed everything." "I couldn't work for him," Daniel said desperately. "You don't understand what it's like, having Richard Walsh as a father. Everything would come with strings attached. He'd control every aspect of my life, our lives. I couldn't do it." "So you chose pride over our partnership," I said. "You made a decision that affected both of us without even consulting me. And then you let your parents blame me for our financial situation, let them think I'm some kind of burden you're carrying." "I never said that," he protested. "You didn't have to," I shot back. "You didn't say anything at all. You just sat there while they tore me apart." He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. We sat there in the truck, the engine ticking as it cooled, neither of us willing to be the first to move. Finally, I opened the door and got out. "I need some air," I said. "Don't wait up." I walked. I walked through our neighborhood in my Goodwill dress and scuffed shoes, my cardigan pulled tight against the Portland drizzle, and I thought about everything I'd learned. Not just about Daniel's parents, but about Daniel himself. About the choices he'd made, the secrets he'd kept, the person he'd allowed me to believe he was. And I thought about that $50,000, sitting in an account he knew nothing about. The secret I'd kept, the lie I'd maintained, the safety net I'd built without him. I'd come to that dinner wanting to expose his family's cruelty, to see how they'd treat me when they thought I had nothing. But what I'd discovered was worse. Daniel had been complicit all along. He'd known what they thought of me, and he'd never defended me. He'd made decisions that affected our entire life together without including me. He'd been ashamed of me, or at least afraid I wasn't enough. I pulled out my phone and stood under streetlight, rain falling softly around me. I opened my banking app, looked at that number again. $50,347.82. And I started to plan. Because if Daniel and his parents thought I was some helpless, naive woman who didn't understand her own worth, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I walked to an all-night diner 3 blocks from our apartment, slid into a corner booth, and ordered coffee I didn't drink. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Donna, kept refilling my cup without comment, perhaps recognizing something in my face that said I needed space more than service. The diner was nearly empty, just me, a couple of truckers at the counter, and a man in a business suit nursing what was probably his 4th cup of coffee while staring at a laptop screen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and unforgiving, making everything look slightly surreal. I sat there in my costume of poverty, still playing a part even though the performance was over, and I let myself feel everything I'd been suppressing during that dinner. The humiliation. The rage. The betrayal. But underneath those hot, immediate emotions was something colder, sharper. Clarity. For 3 years, I'd been married to a man I thought I knew. A man who'd presented himself as honest, straightforward, someone who valued our partnership. But tonight had revealed fault lines I'd never suspected. Daniel wasn't just conflict avoidant with his parents, he was complicit. He'd known they looked down on me, and instead of defending me or setting boundaries, he'd tried to manage me. Make me smaller, quieter, less likely to offend. And the job offer. God, the job offer. How many times had we sat at our kitchen table, looking at bills and talking about how tight money was? How many times had he come home stressed about work, about whether the construction company would have enough projects to keep him employed through the winter? How many times had I felt guilty about not revealing my savings, thinking I was the one keeping secrets? He'd had an escape hatch all along. And he'd never even told me it existed. I pulled out my phone and did something I probably should have done years ago. I Googled Richard Walsh. The results came back immediately. Walsh Development Corporation, one of the Pacific Northwest's largest real estate development firms. Commercial properties, luxury residential projects, shopping centers. Richard Walsh's face stared at me from multiple websites and news articles, looking stern and successful. According to the most recent article I found, the company was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million. $50 million. And Daniel had walked away from being part of that empire because of pride. I wasn't sure whether to admire that or be furious about it. Maybe both. I dug deeper, searching for Patricia Walsh. She was harder to find, no business in her own name, but plenty of society page mentions. Charity galas, fundraising events, board positions at various cultural institutions. In every photo, she wore the same expression she'd had at dinner, polite but remote, like she was looking at the world from behind glass. Then I searched for their address. It took some creative Googling, cross-referencing property records with a development company's history, but I found it, a house in an exclusive Seattle suburb, assessed at $2.3 million. I looked at the listing photos from when they'd purchased it 8 years ago. Sweeping driveway, manicured gardens, walls of windows overlooking Puget Sound. 6 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, a wine cellar, a home theater. This was what Daniel had grown up with. This was the world he'd left behind. And I was the woman his parents blamed for keeping him from returning to it. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Where are you? I'm worried. I stared at those words for a long time before typing back. I need some time to think. I'm safe. I'll be home tomorrow. His response came immediately. Please come home. We need to talk. But I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. Not until I knew what I wanted to say, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to use what I'd learned. I turned off my phone and sat in that diner booth until sunrise, watching the city wake up through the streaked windows. Donna brought me breakfast around 6, eggs, toast, hash browns, without my ordering it. On the house, she said. You look like you could use it. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, my mind working through possibilities and consequences. By the time I left the diner, I had a plan. Not a complete one, not yet, but the beginnings of something. And the first step was research. I went to the public library as soon as it opened, found a computer in the back corner where no one would see my screen, and got to work. I pulled up everything I could find about Walsh Development Corporation, annual reports, news articles, building permits, lawsuits. I made notes on a piece of scrap paper, connecting dots, seeing patterns. Richard Walsh's company was successful, but it wasn't perfect. There had been some controversy a few years back about a low-income housing project that got rezoned for luxury condos, displacing dozens of families. Environmental concerns about a shopping center built too close to protected wetlands. A lawsuit from subcontractors claiming they'd been underpaid. Nothing that had seriously damaged the company's reputation, but enough to show that Richard Walsh wasn't quite the upstanding businessman he presented himself as. And Patricia, I found her connection to a charity that claimed to help underprivileged women get job training, but when I dug into their financial records, I saw that most of their money went to administrative costs and fundraising events. Very little actually made it to the women they claimed to serve. They were hypocrites. Rich hypocrites who looked down on people like me while profiting from the system that kept people like me struggling. The rage I'd been nursing since dinner crystallized into something sharper, more focused. Purpose. I logged out of the library computer, gathered my notes, and headed home. It was mid-morning by then, and I knew Daniel would be frantic. Good. Let him worry. Let him feel a fraction of the anxiety and uncertainty he'd let me live with for 3 years. When I walked into our apartment, I found him pacing the living room, still in yesterday's clothes. He looked terrible, hair disheveled, eyes red, face haggard. He rushed toward me the moment the door opened. Becca, thank God. I was about to call the police. Where have you been? Thinking, I said, walking past him to set down my purse. I was still wearing the Goodwill outfit, and I saw him wince slightly when he looked at me. Good. I wanted him to see me as his parents had seen me. I wanted him to feel uncomfortable. We need to talk about last night, he said, following me into the kitchen. I know my parents were awful. I know they said terrible things. But I want you to know. Why didn't you tell me about the job offer? I interrupted, turning to face him. He stopped, his mouth still half open. What? 3 years ago, your father offered you a job. A good job, from what I understand. 6 figures. Security. And you said no without even mentioning it to me. Why? He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd always found endearing but now just looked like avoidance. Because I knew what I wanted. I didn't need to discuss it. We were already engaged, Daniel. We were planning a life together. And you made a unilateral decision about our financial future without consulting me. It was my career, he protested. My choice to make. Your career that directly affected my life, I shot back. Your choice that meant we'd be living paycheck to paycheck instead of having security. Do you have any idea how many nights I've lain awake worried about money? Worried about what would happen if one of us got sick, or the truck broke down, or we had some emergency we couldn't afford. His face crumpled. I didn't want to be under his thumb. Don't you understand? Working for Richard Walsh means giving up every ounce of independence. It means doing things his way, living by his rules, becoming exactly what he wants me to be. I couldn't do that. I won't do that. Even if it meant we could have had a house by now. I asked. Even if it meant we wouldn't be struggling? Even if it meant I wouldn't have to work myself to exhaustion just to keep us afloat? You wouldn't have to work at all, he said quietly. That was part of the deal. He said if I took the job, I'd make enough that you could stay home, maybe go back to school, do whatever you wanted. The air left my lungs. He said that. Daniel nodded, looking miserable. He said you could be a proper wife, focus on the home and eventually children. He had it all planned out. And you said no because... Because I knew you didn't want that, he said desperately. Because I knew you valued your independence, your career, your autonomy. Because I knew that accepting his offer would mean accepting his worldview about how marriages should work, about what wives should do, about everything. And I couldn't ask you to live that way. I stared at him, trying to process this new information. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to see this as protection rather than deception. But another part, the part that had been humiliated at dinner, that had listened to his parents tear me apart while he said nothing, couldn't quite accept it. So you chose for me, I said slowly. You decided what kind of life I wanted without asking me. Just like you decided to keep that dinner civil by warning me to play small. Just like you decided to let your parents insult me rather than defend me. That's not fair, he said, but his voice was weak. Isn't it? I moved closer to him, and I saw him take an involuntary step back. Tell me, Daniel, when exactly were you planning to tell me about all this? About the job offer, about why your parents hate me, about the life we could have had if you'd made different choices? Were you ever going to tell me, Or were you just going to let me keep thinking we were doing our best when really we were doing your best on your terms? I was protecting you, he insisted. From what? From having choices? From knowing the truth about our situation? He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. From them. From their world. From becoming the kind of person who measures worth in dollar signs and sees people as assets or liabilities. And there it was, the fundamental disconnect. Daniel saw his parents' wealth as corrupting, something to be avoided at all costs. But he'd never had to struggle the way I had. He'd never watched his mother ration groceries or seen his brother spiral because there was no money for proper treatment. He could afford to reject his father's money because he'd been raised with the security it provided. I'd had to build my own security from nothing. I need you to understand something, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. When you make decisions that affect both of us without including me, you're treating me exactly the way your parents do, like I'm too naive, too simple, too inferior to be part of important conversations. You're not protecting me. You're patronizing me. He flinched like I'd slapped him. That's not what I meant to do. But it's what you did. I moved past him toward the bedroom. I need to change clothes. And then we're going to have a real conversation, the kind where you tell me everything, and I decide what I want to do with that information. I closed the bedroom door behind me and leaned against it, my heart racing. Through the wood, I heard Daniel sink onto the couch, heard the springs creak under his weight. I peeled off the Goodwill costume, that awful dress and pilled cardigan that had made me feel like someone I wasn't. I hung them in the back of the closet, not sure if I'd ever wear them again or if they'd just hang there as a reminder of this weekend, this revelation, this turning point. I put on my regular clothes, jeans that fit properly, a soft sweater I'd bought myself 2 years ago, socks without holes. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw Rebecca Walsh looking back at me. Not Becca, not the diminished version Daniel wanted me to be around his parents, but the woman I'd built myself into over 34 years. And I thought about that $50,000. About what it represented, my independence, my safety net, my secret. I thought about what Daniel would say when he found out about it. Would he be angry that I'd hidden it? Relieved that we weren't as financially insecure as he thought? Would it change how he saw me? And then I thought, why should I tell him at all? He'd kept secrets from me for 3 years. He'd made unilateral decisions about our life together. He'd let his parents humiliate me while he sat silent. Maybe it was time for him to understand what it felt like to be on the outside of important information. Maybe it was time to stop feeling guilty about protecting myself. I walked back into the living room. Daniel looked up at me hopefully, probably expecting reconciliation or at least understanding. Instead, I said, I want to meet with your parents again. Just me and them. His face went pale. What? Why? Because I have things I want to say to them. Things that need to be said without you there trying to keep the peace or manage the situation. Becca, that's a terrible idea. They'll eat you alive. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. Let them try. Daniel spent the next 3 days trying to talk me out of it. He used every argument in his arsenal. It would be uncomfortable, it would accomplish nothing, it might make things worse, his parents wouldn't agree to it anyway. But I was immovable, solid as a mountain, because I'd finally understood something crucial. I was done being manageable. Just tell me what you want to say to them, he pleaded on Tuesday night over dinner. Take out Chinese from the place down the street, eaten straight from the containers because neither of us had the energy to pretend we were more civilized than we felt. Tell me, and maybe I can mediate. I interrupted, stabbing my chopsticks into low mine. Translate my concerns into language they'll find acceptable. Make me more palatable. He set down his container, looking wounded. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? I met his eyes across our small kitchen table. That's what you've been doing all along, Daniel. Managing me, managing them, trying to keep everyone comfortable instead of actually dealing with the problem. And what is the problem? He asked, frustration creeping into his voice. That my parents are judgmental? That they didn't immediately embrace you? Becca, they're difficult people, but they're not going to change. Confronting them will only make everything harder. For who? I asked. For me, or for you? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. But here's what Daniel didn't understand. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was planning something more strategic, more calculated. Something that would require patience and perfect timing. I needed to meet with Richard and Patricia alone because I needed to see how they behaved when Daniel wasn't there to witness it. I needed them to feel free to say everything they really thought about me, their son's unsuitable wife. I needed them to fully expose themselves. And then I needed to make sure Daniel saw exactly who his parents were when they thought no one important was watching. On Wednesday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work. I'd used maybe 5 sick days in 6 years, so my supervisor, Catherine, was immediately concerned. Are you okay, Rebecca? Do you need anything? Just a stomach bug, I lied, making my voice weak and miserable. I should be fine by tomorrow. Take care of yourself, she said warmly. Don't rush back if you're still not feeling well. I hung up and felt a twinge of guilt. Catherine was kind, and I hated lying to her. But I needed time, and I needed privacy for what came next. I waited until I heard Daniel's truck pull out of the parking lot, heading to whatever construction site needed him today. Then I sat down at our laptop and composed an email. I wrote it, deleted it, wrote it again. The tone had to be perfect, apologetic but not groveling, respectful but not weak. After an hour of revisions, I finally had something that worked. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Walsh I want to thank you for dinner on Saturday. I know it wasn't easy for you to meet me after all this time, and I appreciate that you made the effort despite your reservations. I also want to apologize if I came across as defensive or uncomfortable. The truth is, I was very nervous about meeting you, and I'm afraid that might have made me seem less composed than I'd hoped. I wondered if it might be possible to meet with you again, just the three of us, without Daniel. I think there are things we should discuss openly, concerns you have that might be easier to address without putting Daniel in the middle. I know you want what's best for your son, and I hope I can show you that I want that too. Would you be available for coffee or lunch sometime this week? I'm happy to meet you in Seattle if that's more convenient. Respectfully, Rebecca. I read it over one more time, then sent it before I could second-guess myself. Then I sat there, staring at the screen, waiting. The response came faster than I expected. Barely 30 minutes later. It was from Patricia's email address, typed with the kind of precision that suggested she was used to communicating efficiently and without warmth. Rebecca. How refreshing to receive such a mature message. Many women in your position would have taken offense at our candor on Saturday, but it seems you have the good sense to understand we were only being honest. I think a meeting without Daniel present is an excellent idea. There are indeed things that need to be discussed frankly, and it will be easier without putting him in the uncomfortable position of having to choose between his loyalty to his parents and his loyalty to his wife. Richard and I are staying in Portland until Friday. We could meet you for lunch tomorrow, Thursday, at 1 p.m. at the Heathman Hotel restaurant. It's downtown, quite civilized. I'm sure you can find it. Patricia Walsh. I read the email 3 times, analyzing every word choice. Many women in your position, meaning women who weren't good enough. Good sense, implying I usually lacked it. Uncomfortable position of having to choose, assuming Daniel's loyalty to them was equivalent to his loyalty to me, as if I were just another obligation rather than his wife. And that final line, I'm sure you can find it, dripping with condescension, implying I might struggle to navigate my own city or locate an upscale restaurant. Perfect. They were exactly as arrogant and dismissive as I'd hoped. I typed back, thank you. I'll see you tomorrow at 1:00 p.m. No pleasantries, no enthusiasm, just confirmation. Let them think I was chastened, intimidated, ready to hear whatever wisdom they wanted to impart. Then I called Daniel. He answered on the third ring, background noise suggesting he was on a job site. Hey, everything okay? I emailed your parents, I said without preamble. Silence. Then, you what? I asked if they'd meet with me. Just the three of us. They agreed. Tomorrow at 1. More silence, longer this time. I could almost hear him processing, trying to decide how to respond. Becca, I really don't think I'm doing this, Daniel, I said firmly. You can either support me or not, but I'm doing it. What are you going to say to them? That's between me and them. You're my wife, he said, frustration clear in his voice. This affects me too. You had 3 years to tell me about the job offer, I replied. You had Saturday night to defend me at dinner. You've had our entire relationship to set boundaries with your parents. I think it's my turn to handle things my way. I heard him take a deep breath. Fine. But please, Becca, please don't do anything that's going to make this worse. Worse than them telling me I should divorce you? Worse than them calling me a burden? What exactly would worse look like, Daniel? He had no answer for that. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the day preparing. I went to the bank and transferred $5,000 from my secret account to my regular checking account, just enough to have some flexibility, but not enough to reveal that I had substantially more in reserve. Then I went shopping. Not at Goodwill this time. Not at Target or Old Navy or any of the budget stores where I usually piece together my wardrobe. I went to Nordstrom. I walked through those gleaming doors feeling like an imposter, surrounded by beautiful clothes with price tags that made my stomach clench. A saleswoman approached, probably in her 40s, with perfect makeup and an appraising eye that I was learning to recognize, the look of someone deciding whether I was worth her time. Can I help you find something? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. I need an outfit for a business lunch, I said, keeping my voice confident. Something professional but not stuffy. I want to look successful. Something shifted in her expression. Maybe she heard the determination in my voice, or maybe she was just good at her job. I think I have some ideas. What's your budget? I thought about that $50,000, about all the years I denied myself things like this. Within reason, I said. I want to look like I belong. Her smile became genuine. Then let's make that happen. An hour later, I walked out of Nordstrom with a bag containing a sleek black pantsuit that fit me perfectly, a cream silk blouse, and a pair of heels that would have horrified the budget-conscious version of me. The total had been just over $600, and I'd paid without flinching, even though my hands had trembled slightly as I handed over my card. The saleswoman, her name was Jennifer, had also talked me into getting my hair done at the salon 2 floors up. You have beautiful hair, she'd said, but it needs some shaping, some life. Trust me. So I'd gone to the salon, sat in the chair, and told the stylist, make me look expensive. She'd laughed, but then she'd gotten to work. 2 hours later, my hair had been cut, colored, and styled into something that made me look like a different person. Still me, but sharper, more polished. The kind of woman who commanded attention and respect. If you're still watching this, I want you to understand something. I wasn't becoming someone else. I was finally becoming myself, the version of me I'd been hiding, the version I'd built with that secret account and those sacrifice brunches and all those choices I'd made to protect myself. And if that resonates with you, if you've ever had to hide your true strength to make other people comfortable, leave a comment and tell me about it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens at this lunch is going to shift everything. And check the description box below for more stories about women who refused to stay small. I came home that evening carrying my shopping bags like weapons. Daniel was already there, sitting on the couch with a beer, watching TV without really seeing it. He looked up when I walked in, and his eyes widened. What did you do? He asked, standing up, staring at my hair. Got ready for tomorrow, I said, moving past him toward the bedroom. He followed me. Becca, you look different. Better or worse? I asked, setting the bags on the bed. He hesitated, and in that hesitation I heard everything he wasn't saying. Just different. How did you pay for all this? I turned to face him. I have savings, Daniel. Not a lot, but enough for one nice outfit and a haircut. Is that a problem? No, of course not. I didn't know you had extra money right now. I thought we were pretty tight. We are, I said carefully. But I've been putting a little aside here and there. For emergencies. It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't quite the truth either. I watched him process this information, saw him decide whether to press further. He chose not to, which told me something important. He didn't really want to know. He preferred the version of our finances where we were equally struggling, equally limited. My having independent resources complicated that narrative. What are you going to say to them tomorrow? He asked instead. I'm going to listen, I said. I'm going to let them tell me exactly what they think about our marriage, about me, about what they want for your future. And then I'm going to decide what to do with that information. That sounds ominous. Does it? I pulled the pantsuit out of its bag, held it up. Or does it just sound like I'm finally taking control of my own narrative? He stared at me, and I saw something in his face that I'd never quite seen before, uncertainty. Maybe even a little fear. As if he was realizing that the woman he'd married, the woman he thought he knew, was capable of things he hadn't anticipated. I don't want you to get hurt, he said quietly. Too late for that, I replied. But maybe it's not too late for me to stop letting other people hurt me without consequences. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, running through scenarios, imagining conversations, preparing myself mentally for what was coming. Daniel tossed and turned beside me, his own anxiety apparent, but he didn't try to talk me out of it again. Maybe he'd finally understood that I was beyond being managed. At 5:30 the next morning, I got up and went through my routine with unusual care. I showered, did my makeup, more than I usually wore, but not so much that it looked like I was trying too hard. Professional, polished, precise. I dried my hair the way the stylist had shown me, creating volume and movement that made me look both younger and more sophisticated. Then I put on the new outfit. The silk blouse felt like luxury against my skin. The pantsuit fit perfectly, making me look taller, more commanding. The heels added 3 inches and transformed my posture, forced me to stand straighter, walk with more confidence. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked successful, composed, formidable. She looked like someone Patricia and Richard Walsh might actually respect. Or at least, someone they'd underestimate differently. Daniel was awake when I came out of the bathroom. He sat up in bed, staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You look, wow. Professional. I asked. Intimidating, he said. In a good way, I think. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Good. Becca, he started, then stopped. Please be careful. My parents, they're good at getting under people's skin. They know how to find weaknesses and exploit them. Don't let them manipulate you into saying or doing something you'll regret. I won't, I promised. And I meant it. Because they weren't the only ones who knew how to find weaknesses. I left the apartment at noon, giving myself plenty of time to get downtown and compose myself before the meeting. I drove my old car, a 2008 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper and an air conditioner that worked intermittently, and felt the cognitive dissonance of looking expensive while driving something that clearly wasn't. But I needed my own transportation, my own means of escape if the lunch went badly. The Heathman Hotel was exactly the kind of place Patricia Walsh would choose, historic, elegant, the kind of establishment that catered to people who expected a certain standard of service. I handed my keys to the valet, ignored his barely concealed surprise at my car, and walked through the lobby like I owned it. The restaurant was on the main floor, all dark wood and white tablecloths and hushed conversations. The hostess greeted me with a professional smile. Do you have a reservation? I'm meeting the Walsh party, I said. Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or deference. Of course. They've already arrived. Right this way. She led me through the dining room to a table by the windows, where Patricia and Richard sat waiting. They both looked up as I approached, and I had the satisfaction of seeing surprise flash across both their faces before they masked it. Patricia recovered first. "Rebecca, how polished you look today." "Thank you," I said, taking the seat across from them. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Richard studied me with those calculating eyes. "Your email was intriguing. You said there were things we should discuss openly. I appreciate directness in business, and I suppose this is a kind of business meeting." A business meeting. As if our relationship, my marriage to their son, was a transaction to be negotiated. "I suppose it is," I agreed. The waiter appeared, took our drink orders. Patricia and Richard ordered wine, expensive wine, from the way the waiter nodded approvingly. I ordered sparkling water with lime. I wanted to be completely clear-headed for what was coming. When the waiter left, Patricia leaned forward slightly. "So, Rebecca, let's not waste time with pleasantries. You wanted to meet with us, without Daniel present. I assume that means you're ready to have an honest conversation about your marriage." "I am," I said. "Good," Richard said. "Because Patricia and I have been concerned for some time about Daniel's choices. He's our only child, and we've always wanted the best for him. When he told us he'd married someone we'd never met, someone from a different background, we were worried. And Saturday's dinner confirmed many of our concerns." "What concerns specifically?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Patricia took a sip of her wine before answering. "That he's settled for less than he deserves. That he's limited his potential out of some misguided notion of love. That he's sacrificed his future to accommodate someone who can't meet him halfway." "You think I'm holding him back?" I said. "Not a question, a statement." "We know you are," Richard replied bluntly. "Daniel could have had everything, a successful career, financial security, a lifestyle befitting his education and upbringing. Instead, he's working construction, living in a cramped apartment, struggling to make ends meet. And the common denominator in all of this is you." I let the words sit there for a moment, felt their weight. Then I asked, "Did Daniel tell you I asked him to accept your job offer?" They both looked startled. Patricia recovered first. "He said you knew nothing about it." "I didn't, until Saturday," I admitted. "But hypothetically, if I had known, if he consulted me the way a real partner should, what do you think I would have said?" "Does it matter?" Richard asked. "He made his choice." "It matters to me," I said. "Because I want you to understand something. You look at me and you see someone poor, unsophisticated, beneath your son. Someone who's dragging him down. But you've never actually asked me what I want for Daniel, what I want for our life together." "So tell us," Patricia said, and her tone suggested she expected nothing interesting. I looked at both of them, these wealthy, arrogant people who thought they knew everything about me based on my clothes and my job and my family background. And I made a decision. Not the one I'd planned, but the one that felt right in that moment. "I want Daniel to be happy," I said simply. "Not successful, not rich, not living up to your expectations. Happy. And if you'd ever bothered to really know your son, you'd understand that working for you would have made him miserable. That he turned down your offer not because of me, but because of who he is. Because he values independence more than money. Because he'd rather struggle on his own terms than succeed on yours." Richard's face darkened. "That's naive thinking. Independence doesn't pay the bills. Pride doesn't provide for a family." "No," I agreed. "But self-respect does matter. And Daniel has that, even if he doesn't have everything else." Patricia laughed, a cold sound. "Self-respect. How noble. Tell me, Rebecca, does self-respect comfort you when you're worried about money? Does it make you feel secure when you're living paycheck to paycheck? Or do you lie awake at night wishing your husband had made different choices? And there it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. The moment when they revealed exactly who they were. I leaned back in my chair, studying them both. You really think I'm helpless, don't you? You think I'm some poor, desperate woman who trapped your son into marriage because I needed financial security. You think I have nothing to offer except my need. We think you're well-intentioned but naive, Patricia said. We think you genuinely care for Daniel, but caring isn't enough. Marriage requires compatibility, shared values, similar backgrounds. You and Daniel are fundamentally mismatched, and the sooner you both accept that, the better. So you want us to divorce, I said flatly. We want you to consider whether staying married is in anyone's best interest, Richard corrected. We're prepared to make it worth your while. A clean break, a settlement that would give you a fresh start, allow you to build a life more appropriate to your circumstances. The room seemed to tilt slightly. They were offering to pay me to divorce their son. How much? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Richard pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then showed me the screen. A number glowed there, $75,000. That's our offer, he said. Enough to significantly improve your life. Pay off any debts, build some savings, maybe go back to school. All you have to do is agree to an amicable divorce. We'll even pay for the attorney fees. I stared at that number. $75,000. More than I had in my secret account. More than I'd saved through years of sacrifice and discipline. And all I had to do was walk away from my marriage. Patricia must have mistaken my silence for consideration. I know it's a lot to process, she said, her voice taking on what she probably thought was a compassionate tone. But think about it, Rebecca. You're young enough to start over. You could find someone more suited to your background, someone who wouldn't expect you to constantly try to keep up with a lifestyle you weren't raised for. This money could change your life. I looked up from Richard's phone, met both their eyes. Can I ask you something? Of course, Patricia said. Do you even love your son? The question hung in the air like smoke. Patricia's face went stiff, offended. What kind of question is that? A sincere one, I said. Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't seem like you care about Daniel's happiness at all. You care about his success, his status, how he reflects on you. But do you actually care about what makes him happy? Do you care that he chose me, that he loves me, that he built a life with me because that's what he wanted? We care about his future, Richard said coldly. We care about protecting him from making mistakes that will limit his potential. I'm the mistake, I said. That's what you're saying. I'm the thing you need to protect him from. You're an obstacle, Patricia said, and now the mask of civility was slipping. You're keeping him from the life he was meant to have. And I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but it's the truth. Daniel could have everything. Career, wealth, status, a wife from his own social circle who understands his world. Instead, he has you. Someone who will always be trying to catch up, always be out of place, always be a reminder that he chose poorly. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. Letting them be fully spoken, fully exposed. Thank you for being honest. She looked surprised, maybe even pleased. So you'll consider our offer? No, I said calmly. I absolutely will not. Richard's expression hardened. Then you're being foolish. This is a generous. It's an insult, I interrupted. You're trying to buy your way out of the reality that your son chose his own path, chose his own wife, chose a life that doesn't revolve around your expectations. And instead of accepting that, instead of trying to build a relationship with me or supporting Daniel's choices, you're trying to erase me like I'm a mistake in your ledger. We're trying to help, Patricia insisted. You're trying to control, I corrected. There's a difference. I stood up, gathering my purse. The food hadn't even arrived yet, but I was done. I'd heard everything I needed to hear. Where are you going? Richard demanded. We're not finished discussing this. Yes, we are, I said. Because here's what you don't understand about me, about Daniel, about our marriage. We might not have your money or your status or your perfect life. But we chose each other. And that choice, that love, is worth more than any amount you could offer me. I turned to leave, but Patricia's voice stopped me. You're making a mistake, Rebecca. You think love is enough, but it isn't. Eventually, the money will matter. The struggle will wear you down. And when that happens, when you finally realize you can't do this anymore, don't expect this offer to still be on the table. I looked back at her, this woman who had everything money could buy but couldn't understand the value of anything money couldn't. You know what the saddest part of this is? You think you're protecting Daniel, but you're the ones he needs protection from. You're the ones who don't see him clearly, who don't value what matters to him, who would rather buy his happiness than earn it. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high and my heart pounding. The valet brought my dented Honda around, and I tipped him with a $20 bill I probably shouldn't have spent. Then I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, processing everything that had just happened. They'd offered me $75,000 to divorce Daniel. They thought I was so desperate, so mercenary, so fundamentally unsuitable that money would solve the problem of my existence. And the worst part? A small, traitorous part of me had been tempted. Not because I wanted to leave Daniel, but because that money represented freedom, security, choices. Combined with my secret savings, it would have been enough to completely transform my life. But taking it would have meant proving them right. It would have meant I was exactly the kind of person they thought I was, someone who could be bought, someone whose love had a price tag. I started the car and drove, not toward home but toward the waterfront, where I could think. I parked and walked along the river, my expensive heels clicking on the pavement, my new outfit drawing appreciative glances from passers-by who had no idea I was falling apart inside. Because here's what I hadn't expected. Underneath my anger, underneath my righteous indignation, there was grief. Grief for the relationship with my in-laws that I'd never have. Grief for the version of my marriage I'd thought existed before Saturday, before I knew about the secrets and the compromises and the shame Daniel carried about me. Grief for the naive woman I'd been a week ago, who'd thought love was simple and trust was easy and family meant loyalty. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd been avoiding. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. "Becca, is everything okay?" And just hearing her voice, worn, worried, familiar, broke something open inside me. "No," I said. "It's really not." My mother, Linda Morrison, had worked in retail for 33 years before her knees finally gave out and forced her into an early retirement she couldn't afford. She lived in Spokane in my aunt's converted garage, surviving on disability payments and whatever help I could secretly send her without Daniel knowing. She'd never finished college, never had a career with a pension or benefits, never built the kind of security that would have made her old age comfortable. She was everything Patricia Walsh feared I would become, a cautionary tale about what happened to women who didn't plan carefully, who trusted the wrong men, who made choices driven by heart instead of strategy. But she was also the smartest person I knew. "Tell me everything," she said when I called her from the waterfront. So I did. I told her about Saturday's dinner, about the Goodwill costume, about meeting Daniel's parents and discovering the truth about the job offer. I told her about the lunch I'd just left, about the $75,000 offer, about Patricia's thinly veiled contempt and Richard's cold calculations. I told her everything except the one thing she didn't know, that I had $50,000 of my own, hidden away in an account she'd never seen. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Those people are poison, Becca. And Daniel. Jesus, I don't even know what to say about Daniel." "He thinks he was protecting me," I said, watching a barge move slowly down the Willamette River. "Protecting you from what? From having choices? From knowing the truth?" She made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. When someone says they're protecting you, what they really mean is they're managing you. They're deciding what you can handle, what you deserve to know, what's appropriate for your delicate little mind. And that's not protection, honey. That's control. I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten. I don't know what to do. Yes, you do, she said firmly. You know exactly what to do. You've always known. You're just afraid to do it because it means admitting that things aren't what you thought they were. What do you think I should do? Another pause. Then, I think you should stop pretending. Stop playing the role Daniel wants you to play. Stop making yourself smaller to make other people comfortable. You're smart, Becca. You're careful and strategic and so much stronger than anyone gives you credit for. Use that. Show them who you really are, and let the chips fall where they may. What if Daniel can't handle who I really am? Then he's not the man you thought you married, she said gently. And that's information worth having, even if it hurts. We talked for another 20 minutes, about Tyler's latest stint in rehab, about her knees, about whether she should try to find part-time work or just accept that her working years were over. Ordinary things, family things, the kind of conversation that reminded me where I came from and why I'd spent a decade building a safety net. Before we hung up, she said, Becca, whatever you decide to do, know that I'm proud of you. You made something of yourself despite everything. Don't let anyone, not Daniel, not his parents, not anyone, make you forget that. After we disconnected, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the city move around me. People walking dogs, couples holding hands, joggers with determined expressions. Everyone moving through their lives with purpose, with direction, while I sat paralyzed by choice. Finally, I drove home. Daniel's truck was in the parking lot when I arrived. He'd left work early, probably too anxious to focus on anything except what was happening with his parents. I found him in the living room, pacing, his phone in his hand like he'd been waiting for news. He turned when I walked in, his face a mixture of hope and dread. How did it go? I set down my purse, took off my heels. My feet ached from walking in them, but I'd never admit it. Your parents offered me $75,000 to divorce you. He froze. They what? 75,000. They said it would give me a fresh start, let me find someone more appropriate to my background. They even offered to pay the attorney fees. I moved past him toward the kitchen, suddenly desperate for water. My throat felt like sandpaper. He followed me, his voice rising. That's insane. They can't just, they had no right. They had every right, I interrupted, filling a glass at the sink. You gave them that right when you let them think I was some kind of burden you were carrying. When you warned me to play small at dinner. When you kept secrets that affected both of us. You created a narrative where I was the problem, and they just followed that script to its logical conclusion. That's not fair, he protested. I never told them you were a burden. You didn't have to. You showed them. I drank the water, felt it cool my throat. You didn't defend me at dinner. You warned me not to try to impress them. You've been ashamed of our life together, and they picked up on that. They smelled weakness, and they exploited it. I'm not ashamed, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Aren't you? I turned to face him. Be honest, Daniel. When you look at me, when you think about our life, the apartment, the second-hand furniture, the careful budgeting, are you proud? Or are you embarrassed that this is the best you could do? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I'm proud of us. Of what we've built together. But you wish we had more, I pressed. You wish you could give me the life your parents have, the life you grew up with. That's why you didn't tell me about the job offer, not just because you didn't want to work for your father, but because you were ashamed that refusing it meant we'd keep struggling. Maybe, he admitted quietly. Maybe I do wish I could give you more. Is that so wrong? No, I said. But lying about it is. Keeping secrets is. Letting your parents treat me like I'm not good enough while you sit silent, that's wrong. He sank into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. I don't know how to fix this. I'm not sure you can, I said. And as the words left my mouth, I realized I meant them. Something had broken between us, Not catastrophically, not irreparably, but definitely. The foundation we'd built our marriage on had cracks I'd never noticed before, and now that I'd seen them, I couldn't unsee them. "What does that mean?" he asked, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you saying you want a divorce?" "I'm saying I don't know what I want anymore," I replied honestly. A week ago, I thought I knew exactly who we were, what our marriage was. Now I feel like I've been living in a story someone else wrote, playing a part one never auditioned for. And I need time to figure out who I actually am, separate from who you need me to be. "I need you to be you," he said desperately. "That's all I've ever wanted." "No," I countered. "You wanted me to be a version of myself that fit comfortably into your narrative. The struggling but noble couple, making it work against the odds. The romance of poverty, the virtue of simple living. But you know what? Poverty isn't romantic, Daniel. Struggle isn't virtuous. They're just hard. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise." He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "When did you become so angry? When did you become so blind?" I shot back. "I've always been angry. I've just been too busy trying to be the wife you wanted to let myself feel it." The silence that followed felt like a chasm opening between us. We stood on opposite sides of our small kitchen, and the distance felt insurmountable. Finally, Daniel said, "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to go to Seattle this weekend," I said. "I want you to sit down with your parents and explain to them, in clear terms, that I am your wife. That you chose me. That their offer was offensive and will never be repeated. I want you to set boundaries that actually mean something, and I want you to enforce them." "And if I do that," he asked, "will that fix things between us?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's a start." He nodded slowly, processing. "Okay. I'll do it. I'll drive up Saturday, have it out with them. Make it clear that this stops now." "Good," I said. Then I walked past him toward the bedroom. "I need to be alone for a while." I closed the door and sat on the edge of our bed, still wearing the expensive pantsuit that had cost more than I usually spent in a month. I thought about that $75,000 offer, about my own $50,000 in hiding, about the layers of secrets and money and power that seemed to define every relationship in my life. And I made a decision. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my secret account, using the mobile hotspot on my phone so the transaction wouldn't show up in our shared browsing history. I stared at the balance, $50, $347.82, and I thought about all the ways that money represented both my strength and my shame. My foresight and my deception. My safety and my betrayal. Then I did something I'd never imagined doing. I created a new account, this one in both Daniel's name and mine. A joint account, visible, transparent. And I transferred exactly half of my secret savings into it, $25,173.91. I wasn't ready to reveal everything, but I was ready to start sharing the burden of our financial security. I was ready to stop carrying this secret alone, even if I couldn't yet bring myself to admit the full scope of it. I sent Daniel an email with the account information and a simple message: "I've been saving more than I told you. This is half of what I have. Use it if you need to. We'll talk about the rest later." Then I closed the laptop, changed out of my expensive clothes, and crawled into bed even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. Exhaustion hit me like a wave, not just physical tiredness, but the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been holding themselves together through sheer force of will and finally could let go. I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to darkness and the sound of Daniel moving quietly around the bedroom. I felt the bed dip as he sat on the edge, felt his hand tentatively touch my shoulder. "Becca," he whispered. "You awake?" "Yeah," I mumbled. "I got your email." His voice was strange, thick with emotion, uncertain. "Where did you get that money?" "I saved it," I said, rolling over to face him in the darkness. "Over years. Before we met, during our relationship. I've been putting money aside whenever I could." That's amazing, he said. But why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to know it was there, I said simply. I needed to know that if everything fell apart, I'd be okay. My mom had nothing when my dad left. Nothing. I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable. I heard him take a shaky breath. Did you think I'd leave? I thought anything could happen, I replied. People get sick, accidents happen, marriages end. I wasn't saving it because I didn't trust you. I was saving it because I needed to trust myself. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, is there more? I hesitated. This was the moment. I could tell him the truth, reveal the full 50,000, lay all my cards on the table. Or I could maintain this one last boundary, this one last secret that was fully mine. Yes, I admitted. But I'm not ready to share it all yet. I need to know some things first. Like what? Like whether you're going to actually stand up to your parents. Like whether this marriage is a real partnership or if I'm just an accessory to your life. Like whether you can love me without being ashamed of where we are and what we have. He reached out in the darkness, found my hand. I do love you. I'm sorry I made you think otherwise. Sorry isn't enough, I said gently. I need you to do better. To be better. To be the partner I deserve, not the one you think you're supposed to be. I will, he promised. I'll go to Seattle this weekend. I'll tell them everything. And when I come back, we'll start over. Really start over, with honesty and transparency and all the things we should have had from the beginning. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. But I'd learned something important over the past week. Wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. Trust has to be earned, rebuilt piece by piece until it's strong enough to bear weight again. Okay, I said. We'll see. He squeezed my hand once more, then lay down beside me. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep, but I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the weekend ahead. Daniel would go to Seattle. He'd confront his parents. He'd try to set boundaries and defend our marriage and prove that he could be the husband I needed. And while he was gone, I'd figure out what I actually wanted. Not what I thought I should want, not what would make everyone else comfortable, but what would make me whole. Because somewhere along the way, in trying to be a good wife, a manageable partner, someone who fit into Daniel's narrative, I'd lost track of my own story. I'd forgotten that I was the protagonist of my own life, not a supporting character in his. It was time to remember. Friday came and went in a strange, suspended state. Daniel worked a full day, came home exhausted, and we moved around each other like dancers who'd forgotten the choreography. We were polite, careful, each of us navigating the new terrain of our relationship with caution. He'd seen the money I'd transferred, $25, 173.91, and it had changed something in how he looked at me. There was respect now. Maybe even a little wariness. I wasn't just his struggling wife anymore. I was someone who'd been planning, saving, building a foundation he hadn't known existed. Saturday morning, he packed a small duffel bag for the drive to Seattle. I watched him from the bedroom doorway, noting the way his hands shook slightly as he folded a clean shirt. He was nervous. Good. He should be. You don't have to do this alone, I said. I could come with you. He shook his head. No, this is something I need to do by myself. They need to understand that I'm serious, that I'm not going to let them interfere in our marriage anymore. What are you going to say to them? He zipped the bag, straightened up. The truth. That their offer was insulting. That you're my wife and I love you. That if they can't respect you, they can't have a relationship with me. All the things I should have said years ago. And if they don't accept that, then I guess I'll know where things stand, he said, but his voice wavered. For all his resolve, Daniel still wanted his parents' approval. Still craved some version of their love, even knowing how conditional it was. I walked over to him, put my hands on his shoulders. Daniel, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens today, whatever they say, this isn't about choosing between them and me. This is about you deciding what kind of person you want to be. Whether you want to be someone who sets boundaries and enforces them, or someone who lets other people define who you are and what your life should look like. He pulled me into a hug, held me tight. I'm going to make this right, he promised into my hair. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But another part, the part that had been carefully saving money for a decade, the part that had walked into that dinner wearing Goodwill clothes to test his loyalty, remained skeptical. He left around 9, his truck disappearing down the street toward the highway. I stood at our apartment window, watching until I couldn't see him anymore, and then I turned back to the empty space and realized I had an entire weekend alone. When was the last time I'd had that? Not just hours, but days. Time to think without having to consider someone else's needs or feelings or presence. Time to be completely, selfishly alone with my thoughts. I spent the first hour cleaning, scrubbing the kitchen, vacuuming, organizing closets. Physical work that let my mind wander. But eventually I ran out of things to clean, and I had to sit down and actually face what I'd been avoiding. What did I want? Not what Daniel wanted, not what his parents expected, not what my mother hoped for me. What did I, Rebecca Walsh, actually want from my life? I pulled out a notebook, an old one from college, mostly empty pages with a few lecture notes from classes I barely remembered, and I started writing. Not organized thoughts, just stream of consciousness. Every feeling, every fear, every desire I'd been suppressing. I wrote about the satisfaction I'd felt walking into that lunch meeting looking expensive, powerful, put together. The way Patricia's eyes had widened, just for a moment, before she'd recovered. The small, vicious pleasure of proving I wasn't what they'd assumed. I wrote about the hurt of Daniel's silence at that first dinner. How I'd needed him to defend me, to stand up and say, "That's my wife you're talking about," and how his failure to do that had created a wound I wasn't sure could heal. I wrote about my mother, about watching her struggle, about the fear that had driven me to save and save and save until I had a cushion she'd never had. About the guilt I felt every time I sent her money, knowing I had so much more I could send but couldn't without revealing my secret. I wrote about the $50,000. About what it represented, security, yes, but also deception. About how keeping it secret had been both necessary and destructive. About how revealing even half of it had felt like losing armor, making myself vulnerable in ways that terrified me. And I wrote about Daniel. About the man I'd thought he was when we met, Kindy, uncomplicated, someone who valued simplicity and honesty. And about the man I was discovering he actually was, conflict avoidant, ashamed of our circumstances, unwilling to fully separate himself from his parents' influence even as he claimed to reject their values. By the time I finished writing, my hand was cramping and I'd filled 20 pages. I read back through them, seeing patterns I hadn't noticed while writing. Fear appeared on nearly every page. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of being trapped, fear of becoming my mother, fear of losing Daniel, fear of staying with Daniel, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of making any choice at all. I set down the notebook and picked up my phone. Without letting myself overthink it, I called my brother. Tyler answered on the 5th ring, his voice rough with sleep even though it was almost noon. "Becca, everything okay?" "Yeah, I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" "Day 17 sober," he said, and I heard pride in his voice. "It's been hard, but I'm doing it. The counselor here thinks I'm finally ready to actually commit this time." "That's great, Ty. I'm really proud of you." "Thanks." A pause. "You don't usually call just to check in. What's going on?" I hesitated, then decided he deserved honesty. "I'm having marriage problems. Daniel's parents want us to get divorced. They even offered me money to walk away." "Jesus." I heard him moving, probably sitting up in bed. "How much?" $75,000. He whistled low. That's a lot of money, Beck. Especially for people like us. Did you take it?" "No. Of course not. I love Daniel." "Do you?" he asked, and his directness surprised me. Or do you love the idea of not failing at marriage like Dad failed Mom? The question hit me like a slap. That's not fair. Maybe not. But you've spent your whole life trying to be different from Mom, trying to be more careful, more prepared, more in control. Maybe you married Daniel because he felt safe, not because he was right for you. He is right for me, I protested, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Then why are you calling me instead of fighting for him? Tyler asked. Why are you at home alone while he deals with his parents? If you really believed in this marriage, wouldn't you be there with him? He said he needed to do it alone. And you just accepted that? Come on, Beck. When have you ever just accepted what someone told you without pushing back? You're the most stubborn person I know. If you're not fighting for this, maybe it's because deep down, you're not sure it's worth fighting for. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling its truth settle into my bones. When did you get so insightful? He laughed, but it was bitter. Therapy. Lots and lots of therapy. Turns out when you're forced to actually examine your choices and motivations, you learn some shit about yourself. And about the people around you. I'm glad you're doing better, I said softly. Me too. And Becca. Whatever you decide about Daniel, about the marriage, about the money, make sure it's what you actually want, not what you think you should want. Life's too short to spend it living someone else's version of your story. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of the apartment, listening to the distant sounds of the city, traffic, sirens, someone's music playing too loud. I thought about what Tyler had said, about whether I was fighting for my marriage or just fighting to not fail. The distinction felt important. My phone rang around 3 in the afternoon. Daniel's name lit up the screen, and my stomach clenched. I answered. How did it go? Not great. His voice sounded hollow, exhausted. They're not backing down, Becca. I told them everything, that their offer was insulting, that you're my wife and I love you, that they need to respect our choices. I even told them about the money you've been saving, trying to show them you're not some helpless person who needs their charity. And my dad said that just proves you've been deceiving me all along. That if you could hide that money, what else are you hiding? My mom said it shows you never trusted me, that I married someone who was already planning an exit strategy. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. They're making you into the villain no matter what you do. I felt anger surge through me, hot and righteous. What did you say to that? Silence. Long, damning silence. Daniel, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. What did you say when they accused me of being deceptive? I tried to explain. I told them you had good reasons, that your mom's situation made you cautious. But they just kept pushing, kept twisting everything. And then, he stopped. Then what? Then my dad said that if I was determined to stay married to you, he was cutting me off. No more family gatherings, no more help if we need it, no inheritance. He said I'm choosing you over my family, and if that's my choice, I have to live with the consequences. My hands had started shaking. And what did you say? I said I needed time to think about it. The world seemed to stop. You said what? Becca, you have to understand, they are my parents. My only family. If I choose you and things don't work out between us, I'll have nothing. No family, no support system, nothing. I just need time to make sure I'm making the right decision. The right decision, I repeated numbly. You need time to decide whether your wife is worth losing your parents over. That's not, you're making it sound worse than it is. Am I? I stood up, started pacing. Daniel, they offered me money to divorce you. They called me deceptive and untrustworthy. They're holding their relationship with you hostage to force you to leave me. And your response was, I need time to think about it. What was I supposed to say? He demanded, frustration breaking through. Was I supposed to blow up my entire family relationship on the spot? Make a decision that huge without considering all the implications? Yes. I shouted. Yes, you were supposed to say my wife is more important than your manipulation. You were supposed to choose us, Daniel. That's what marriage means. That's what vows mean. When you promise to forsake all others, that included your parents. You're being unreasonable, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. This isn't black and white. It absolutely is, I said, suddenly calm. You either respect our marriage or you don't. You either believe in us enough to set boundaries with your parents, or you believe their money and approval are more valuable than our partnership. There's no middle ground here. I just need time, he repeated. A few days to clear my head, figure out what I really want. Is that so wrong? No, I said quietly. It's not wrong. It's just revealing. What does that mean? It means you've shown me who you are, Daniel. And I need time too. Time to decide whether who you are is someone I want to spend my life with. Becca, please don't. I hung up. My hands were still shaking. My whole body was shaking. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at it, half expecting it to ring again, half dreading that it would. It didn't ring. I stood there in our kitchen, our cramped, modest, carefully budgeted kitchen, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The rage, the betrayal, the bone-deep disappointment. Not just in Daniel, but in myself. For thinking love would be enough. For believing that choosing someone meant they'd choose you back with equal certainty. For building a life on a foundation that was apparently made of sand. If you're still watching this, if you've made it this far into my story, I need to know I'm not alone in this. Leave a comment telling me about a time you realized someone wasn't who you thought they were. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what happens next is going to change everything, not just for me and Daniel, but for his parents too. And check the description box below for more stories about women who had to decide whether to fight for relationships that didn't fight for them. I spent the rest of Saturday in a strange, suspended state. I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't do anything dramatic. I just existed, moving through the hours like I was underwater. I ate food I didn't taste. I watched TV shows I didn't process. I went to bed alone and stared at the ceiling, thinking about choices and consequences and the life I'd built that suddenly felt like it was collapsing around me. Daniel didn't call again that night. Didn't text. Nothing. Sunday morning, I woke up to silence and sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. I reached automatically for my phone, then stopped myself. If he wanted to talk to me, he knew how to reach me. I wasn't going to chase him, wasn't going to beg him to choose me over his parents' money and approval. Instead, I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop. I logged into my secret account, the one that still held $25,173.91, the half I hadn't revealed, and I stared at that number. Then I opened a new browser tab and started researching divorce lawyers in Portland. I wasn't sure I wanted a divorce, but I was sure I needed to know my options. I needed to understand what ending my marriage would look like, financially, legally, emotionally. I needed to see the escape routes before I decided whether to use them. I made notes, copied names and phone numbers, read reviews and fee structures. I was methodical about it, careful, treating it like any other research project. It was easier that way, easier to stay analytical instead of emotional. Around noon, my phone finally rang. Daniel's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "I'm coming home," he said without preamble. "We need to talk." "Okay," I said. "When will you be here?" "I'm leaving now. I should be back around 4. "I'll be here." Another pause. Then, "Becca, I'm sorry. I know I handled yesterday badly. I need you to understand how complicated this is." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You have a choice to make, and it's hard. I get it. But Daniel, I have a choice to make too. And I'm not going to wait forever for you to figure out whether I'm worth choosing." That's not," he stopped, started again. We'll talk when I get home. Okay. Okay. I hung up and went back to my research. By the time he walked through the door at 4:15, I had compiled a list of 5 divorce attorneys, complete with their specialties and consultation fees. I'd also calculated my net worth, the secret savings, the joint account, my car, my retirement account from work. Altogether, I had about $38,000 in assets. Enough to start over. Enough to survive. Daniel looked terrible when he came in. His eyes were red, his face drawn, his shoulders slumped like he was carrying the weight of the world. He set down his duffel bag and just stood there, looking at me. "So," I said from my position on the couch, laptop open in front of me, "did you figure it out? Did you decide whether your marriage is worth more than your parents' approval?" He flinched. "It's not that simple." "It really is," I said. "But go ahead. Explain to me why it's complicated." He moved to the armchair across from me, sat down heavily. "They're willing to compromise. My dad said if I stay married to you, he'll still maintain a relationship with me. We can still come to family gatherings, still be part of the family. But, I prompted when he hesitated. "But there are conditions. We have to sign a prenup retroactively, something that protects their assets if we divorce. We have to agree to family therapy sessions with a counselor they choose. And we have to accept their involvement in major life decisions, where we live, whether we have kids, how we raise them." I stared at him. "They want to control our entire lives in exchange for allowing you to stay married to me." "They want to protect their interests," he corrected. "And they want to make sure we're making good decisions." "Their definition of good decisions," I said. "Which apparently includes letting them dictate how we live." "It's not ideal," he admitted. "But it's better than being completely cut off. Better than losing my family entirely." I closed my laptop slowly, deliberately. "Daniel, do you hear yourself? You're sitting here telling me that your parents' conditional acceptance is better than having a marriage built on mutual respect and autonomy. You're saying their money and approval are more valuable than our independence." "I'm saying I don't want to lose everything," he shot back. "I don't want to choose between you and them if I don't have to." "But you do have to," I said quietly. "That's what you're not getting. They've made this a binary choice, submit to their control or lose their support. And instead of telling them that's unacceptable, instead of setting boundaries and walking away if they won't respect those boundaries, you're trying to negotiate terms of surrender. That's not fair." "None of this is fair," I agreed. "But it is simple. Either you believe in us enough to tell your parents they don't get to run our lives, or you don't. Either you're willing to be a fully independent adult with a real marriage, or you want to stay a dependent child with your parents pulling the strings. There's no middle ground, Daniel. There never was." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I can't do it," he said, so softly I almost didn't hear him. "I can't cut them off completely. They are my parents. They raised me, supported me, gave me everything. I can't just walk away from that. Even if staying means losing me." I asked. He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I'm not losing you. We're still married. We can make this work, even with their conditions. We can." "No," I interrupted. "We can't. Because I won't live like that. I won't spend my life being judged and monitored and controlled by people who think I'm not good enough. I won't raise children, if we even have children, in an environment where their grandparents see their mother as inferior. And I won't be married to someone who values his parents' money more than our partnership." "It's not about the money," he insisted. "Isn't it?" I stood up, started pacing. "If they were poor, if they had nothing to offer you except their love and approval, would you still be negotiating terms? Or would you find it easier to tell them to back off?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I stopped pacing, turned to face him. "I want you to leave." His head snapped up. "What?" "I want you to pack some things and stay somewhere else for a while." A week, maybe 2. I need space to think, and you need time to figure out what you really want. Because right now, we're just hurting each other. Becca, please. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything except asking for time, I said. If our marriage is strong enough to survive, it'll survive some distance. And if it's not... I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He stood up slowly, defeated. Is this what you want? Really? What I want, I said carefully, is a partner who chooses me without conditions. Someone who stands beside me, not in front of me trying to shield me from his parents' judgment. Someone who values our life together more than his inheritance. And right now, I don't know if you're capable of being that person. He walked to the bedroom, started throwing clothes into his duffel bag. I heard drawers opening and closing, hangers scraping against the closet rod. When he came back out, bag in hand, he looked at me with such profound sadness that I almost took it back, almost told him to stay, almost chose comfort over growth. But I didn't. I'll be at Mike's place, he said, referring to his best friend from college. Call me when, if you want to talk. Okay, I said. He moved toward the door, then stopped. I love you, Becca. I know I've fucked this up spectacularly, but I do love you. I know, I said. But love isn't enough. It never was. He left, and I stood in the sudden silence of the apartment, listening to his truck start, listening to it drive away. And then, finally, I let myself cry. I cried for the marriage I'd thought I had. For the man I'd thought Daniel was. For the naive woman I'd been a week ago, before Saturday's dinner, before meeting his parents, before understanding how fragile and conditional his commitment really was. But underneath the grief, underneath the tears, there was something else. Something harder, stronger, more certain. Relief. Because now I knew. Now I understood exactly what I was dealing with. And knowledge, even painful knowledge, was better than the comfortable delusion I'd been living in. I had decisions to make, plans to execute. But first, I had to stop pretending that my marriage was salvageable just because I wanted it to be. I had to face the truth. Daniel Walsh was a good man in many ways, but he wasn't strong enough to be my husband. Not in the way I needed. Not in the way I deserved. And that realization, as painful as it was, finally set me free. I spent Sunday night alone in the apartment, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, drinking wine I probably shouldn't have and making lists. Lists were safe. Lists were controllable. Lists gave me the illusion that I could organize chaos into something manageable. List 1. What I knew for certain. Daniel's parents wanted me gone. Daniel was too weak to stand up to them. I had roughly $38,000 in assets. I had a job that could support me. I was 34 years old, young enough to start over. I was done pretending to be less than I was. List 2. What I didn't know. Whether Daniel would actually choose his parents over me. Whether our marriage could survive this. Whether I even wanted it to survive. What revenge against Richard and Patricia Walsh would look like. Whether I was capable of actually executing that revenge. List 3. What I wanted. Justice. Recognition. For Daniel to see his parents clearly. For his parents to understand they'd underestimated me. To stop feeling like I had to apologize for existing. I stared at that third list for a long time, wine glass balanced on my knee, and I realized something crucial. I didn't just want to save my marriage. I wanted to punish the people who'd tried to destroy it. I wanted Richard and Patricia Walsh to pay for their arrogance, their cruelty, their assumption that money could solve the problem of my existence. But how? I opened my laptop and pulled up all the research I'd done on Walsh Development Corporation. I read through news articles, building permits, financial disclosures. I looked for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, anything that could be exploited. And then I found it. Buried in a 3-year-old article about a controversial development project, Walsh Development had displaced a community of low-income residents to build luxury condos. The residents had protested, had tried to fight the eviction, but they'd lacked resources and legal representation. Eventually, they'd been forced out, scattered to various parts of the city, their community destroyed. The article included quotes from some of the displaced residents. An elderly woman named Margaret Chen who'd lost her home of 40 years. A single father named James Rodriguez whose kids had to change schools. A young mother named Keisha Washington who'd ended up homeless for 6 months before finding new housing. Real people. Real damage. Also, Richard Walsh could make more money. I kept digging. Found more articles, more controversies. A wetland that had been accidentally filled in during construction. Subcontractors who claimed they'd been underpaid or not paid at all. Building code violations that had been quietly settled. Nothing catastrophic enough to seriously damage the company's reputation, but a pattern of ethical corners being cut in pursuit of profit. And then I found something interesting. Patricia Walsh's charity, the one that supposedly helped underprivileged women. I pulled up their tax returns, publicly available for non-profits, and spent 2 hours analyzing their finances. The numbers told a damning story. Of the $1.2 million they'd raised last year, only $147,000 had gone to actual program services, job training, counseling, placement assistance. The rest had been eaten up by administrative costs, which included 6-figure salaries for board members, including Patricia, expensive fundraising galas, and a swanky office in downtown Seattle. They were profiting from the appearance of charity while doing minimal actual good. It was legal, technically, but it was also morally bankrupt. The kind of thing that would look terrible if someone highlighted it publicly. I sat back, mind racing. This was it. This was how I could hurt them, not through violence or direct confrontation, but through exposure. By revealing the gap between the image they presented to the world and the reality of who they actually were. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I needed someone with expertise in PR, in social media, in making information go viral. I needed someone who understood how to tell a story that would capture public attention and refuse to let go. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Jenna Blackwell. Jenna and I had worked together briefly 6 years ago at a different clinic before she'd left to start her own PR consulting firm. She specialized in crisis management and reputation defense, but I knew from her social media that she had a particular passion for exposing corporate hypocrisy and advocating for marginalized communities. We'd kept in casual touch over the years, occasional comments on each other's Facebook posts, birthday wishes, that sort of thing. It was nearly 11 at night, too late to call, but I sent her a text anyway. Hey Jenna, this is Rebecca Walsh from the clinic. I know this is random, but I need your professional help with something potentially explosive. Any chance we could meet for coffee this week? I'll pay your consultation rate. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then set the phone down and stared at it, willing it to buzz with a response. It took less than 5 minutes. Rebecca. Of course, I remember you. This sounds intriguing. I'm free tomorrow, Monday, at 2 p.m. if that works. Coffee shop on 23rd and Burnside. And don't worry about the consultation rate. If this is as interesting as it sounds, consider the first meeting free. I typed back, perfect. See you then. And Jenna. It's more than interesting. It's potentially career-making. Now you really have my attention, she responded. See you tomorrow. I set down the phone, feeling something shift inside me. This was real now. I was actually doing this. I was going to go after Richard and Patricia Walsh with everything I had. And if Daniel got caught in the crossfire, if exposing his parents' hypocrisy damaged his relationship with them beyond repair, well, maybe that was what needed to happen. Maybe some bridges needed to be burned. Monday morning, I called in sick again. Catherine sounded more concerned this time. Rebecca, if you need more time off, we can arrange something. Family leave, personal days, whatever you need. You've been with us for 6 years and you've never taken more than a day or two. Don't worry about coming back until you're ready. Her kindness made my throat tight. Thank you, Catherine. I should be back by Wednesday. I just need a few days to deal with some personal issues. Take care of yourself, she said warmly. And if you need anything, anything at all, you call me. Okay. After we hung up, I spent the morning gathering evidence. I printed articles about the low-income housing displacement. I downloaded Walsh Development's financial disclosures. I pulled up Patricia's charity tax returns and highlighted the most damaging numbers. I compiled everything into a folder, organizing it by theme: corporate greed, fake charity, pattern of ethical violations. By the time I left for my meeting with Jenna, I had a case file that would make any investigative journalist salivate. The coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd, but I spotted Jenna immediately at a corner table. She'd changed since I'd last seen her. Her hair was shorter, more stylish, and she traded the business casual wardrobe I remembered for something more deliberately edgy. Leather jacket, bold lipstick, an air of confidence that suggested she'd found her calling. She stood when she saw me, pulled me into a quick hug. "Rebecca Walsh. You look good. Different, but good. Love the hair." "Thanks," I said, touching my newly styled cut self-consciously. "A lot has changed in the past week." "So tell me everything," she said as we sat down. "And don't leave anything out. I want the whole story." So I told her. All of it. The Saturday dinner where I'd pretended to be poor. Meeting Daniel's parents and experiencing their cruelty firsthand. The lunch where they'd offered me money to divorce their son. Daniel's failure to defend me, to choose me, to be the partner I'd needed him to be. My decision to stop being managed and start being dangerous. Jenna listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from curiosity to outrage to something that looked like predatory satisfaction. When I finished, she sat back and let out a low whistle. "Holy shit, Rebecca. This is..." She paused, searching for the right word. "This is perfect. These people are walking, talking embodiments of everything wrong with wealth inequality and class privilege. And they're just arrogant enough to have left a trail of evidence. Do you have documentation?" I slid the folder across the table. Everything I could find. Articles, financial records, tax returns. It's all there. She opened the folder and started reading, her eyes getting wider with each page. Jesus. The charity numbers alone are damning. And the displacement of those residents. We could track them down, get their stories. Make this personal, not just abstract. Show the real human cost of the Walsh business practices. "That's what I was thinking," I said. "But I need your help to make it go viral. To get enough attention that they can't just bury it with lawyers and PR firms. I want this to follow them everywhere. I want their friends to know, their colleagues to know, every person who's ever praised them for their philanthropy to know that it's all a facade." Jenna looked up from the folder, her eyes gleaming. "You want to destroy them." "I want them to understand what it feels like to be judged," I corrected. "To have your worth reduced to a number, to be dismissed because someone decided you're not good enough. I want them to feel vulnerable, exposed, small. The way they made me feel." "I love it," Jenna said simply. "I love everything about this. And I think I know exactly how to make it happen." She pulled out her laptop and started typing, talking as she worked. "We'll need a multi-platform strategy. Social media, obviously, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We create accounts specifically for this story, maybe call them something like Seattle's Fake Philanthropists or The Real Walsh Family. We start posting the information in digestible chunks, thread format on Twitter, infographics on Instagram, video testimonials on TikTok if we can get the displaced residents to participate." "Will they?" I asked. "Participate, I mean." "Oh, absolutely," Jenna said confidently. "People who've been wronged by wealthy developers are usually dying to tell their stories. They just need a platform and some protection from legal retaliation. We can offer both." She kept typing, outlining a strategy that was both brilliant and terrifying. "We'll also reach out to local journalists, the ones who cover urban development and housing issues. Give them exclusive access to some of your research in exchange for articles. Get the mainstream media involved so this isn't just a social media story, it's a legitimate news story." What about blowback? I asked. The Walshs have money and connections. They'll come after us. Let them try, Jenna said with a grin that was almost feral. Everything we're posting is factual, verifiable, and pulled from public records. They can threaten to sue, but they won't actually do it because that would just draw more attention to the story. The Streisand effect, you know? Besides, I've handled worse. I once went after a Fortune 500 company for labor violations and lived to tell the tale. I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not hope that my marriage would survive, but hope that I could actually make a difference. That I could turn my pain into something productive, even righteous. When do we start? I asked. Today, Jenna said. Right now. But first, I need to know, are you absolutely sure about this? Because once we start, there's no taking it back. Your name will be attached to this campaign. Daniel will know you're behind it. His parents will definitely know. Your marriage might not survive the fallout. I thought about Daniel at Mike's apartment, thinking about whether his parents' conditions were acceptable. I thought about Richard and Patricia Walsh, smug and secure in their wealth and privilege, never questioning whether they had the right to treat people as disposable. I thought about Margaret Chen, losing her home of 40 years. About Keisha Washington, 6 months homeless because luxury condos were more valuable than community. I'm sure, I said. Jenna closed her laptop, extended her hand across the table. Then let's burn it all down. We shook hands, and I felt something click into place. This was who I was supposed to be. Not the diminished, careful version I'd been playing for Daniel, but someone fierce and strategic and willing to fight. Someone who didn't just survive but demanded justice. We spent the next 3 hours at that coffee shop, planning every detail of the campaign. Jenna made phone calls, sent emails, started building the infrastructure for what she called the most righteous takedown of my career. I provided information, answered questions, helped craft the narrative we'd be telling. By the time we left, it was nearly 6 o'clock and we had a launch date, Friday. For days to finalize everything, to track down the displaced residents, to prepare for the tsunami we were about to unleash. One more thing, Jenna said as we stood outside the coffee shop, the evening air cool against my skin. Have you thought about what you want the endgame to be? Like, what does success look like for you? Is it just public humiliation for the Walshs? Or is there something more specific you're hoping to achieve? I considered the question. I want them to lose something they value, I said slowly. The way they wanted me to lose my marriage. Maybe not everything, but enough that they understand consequences. Enough that they think twice before treating someone as disposable ever again. Patricia's charity, Jenna said thoughtfully. If we expose how little good it actually does, we could cost her board positions, damage her social standing. That's her whole identity, being seen as a benevolent, charitable society woman. Taking that away would hurt her more than any amount of money. And Richard's business reputation, I added. Developers rely on public goodwill, on being seen as contributing to the community. If we paint him as someone who destroys communities for profit, who prioritizes luxury developments over affordable housing, that could impact his future projects. Make it harder to get permits approved, harder to find investors who want to be associated with him. Jenna nodded approvingly. You're thinking like a strategist. I like it. Okay, I'll work on the messaging to emphasize those angles. By Friday, we'll have something that'll make them wish they'd never heard your name. I drove home as the city darkened around me, feeling more alive than I had in days. Maybe more alive than I'd felt in years. This was what power felt like, not the power of money or status, but the power of information, of strategy, of refusing to be invisible. My phone buzzed as I pulled into the apartment parking lot. A text from Daniel. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, not yet. I'm still thinking. His response came immediately. About what? About us. About everything, I replied. About who I am, who you are, whether those two people can actually build a life together. Give me until the end of the week. Okay, he wrote. But Becca, I miss you. I know I fucked up, but I miss you. I didn't respond to that. What was there to say? That I missed him too? That I was simultaneously planning to destroy his parents' reputations while trying to decide if our marriage was worth saving? That I'd become someone he probably wouldn't recognize, someone capable of calculated revenge? Instead, I went inside, poured myself another glass of wine, and pulled out my laptop. I had work to do. Stories to verify, evidence to compile, justice to orchestrate. If Daniel's parents thought they could pay me to disappear, they were about to learn that some women couldn't be bought. Some women fought back. And some women knew exactly where to aim to make it hurt. By Friday, the whole world would know who Richard and Patricia Walsh really were. And by Friday, I'd know whether my marriage could survive the truth of who I'd become. Either way, I was done apologizing for taking up space. The next 4 days passed in a blur of research, phone calls, and righteous fury channeled into productive action. Jenna was a force of nature, tracking down 3 of the displaced residents from the Walsh Development Project and convincing them to share their stories on camera. She hired a videographer, secured releases, and conducted interviews that were both heartbreaking and infuriating. Margaret Chen, the elderly woman who'd lost her home of 40 years, spoke about watching her community, her friends, her neighbors, the small businesses she'd patronized for decades, get systematically dismantled. They told us we'd get relocation assistance, she said into the camera, her voice steady but her hands trembling. We got 3 months' rent and a handshake. I ended up in a subsidized apartment 30 miles away. I lost everything that made my neighborhood home. And Mr. Walsh? He built condos that start at $800,000. James Rodriguez talked about his kids having to change schools mid-year, about losing the after-school care system he'd carefully built around their old apartment. My daughter had friends there, he said. A support system. We were a community. Walsh Development saw real estate. They didn't see people. Keisha Washington was the most devastating. She was only 26, a single mother working 2 jobs, and she'd ended up sleeping in her car with her 3-year-old son for almost 6 months before finding new housing. I wasn't homeless because I was irresponsible, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was homeless because someone decided my home was worth more empty than with me in it. Watching those interviews, I felt my resolve crystallize into something diamond hard. This wasn't just about my hurt feelings anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior, a worldview that saw people as obstacles to profit rather than human beings deserving of dignity. Jenna and I worked late every night, building the social media accounts, crafting posts, scheduling the rollout. She'd brought in a graphic designer who created devastating infographics comparing Patricia's charity spending, the fancy galas, the expensive office space, the 6-figure salaries, with the pittance that actually went to helping women. We reached out to local journalists, offering them exclusive angles on the story. 2-bit immediately, a housing reporter for the Seattle Times who'd covered the original displacement, and an investigative journalist from a Portland alternative weekly who specialized in exposing wealthy hypocrisy. By Thursday night, everything was ready. The posts were scheduled. The videos were uploaded and set to go live Friday morning at 8 a.m. The journalists had their embargoed information and were preparing their articles. We'd even created a simple website, realwalshfamily.com, that compiled all the evidence in one easily shareable location. This is going to explode, Jenna said Thursday evening as we did a final review of everything. We were at her office, a converted loft space in southeast Portland decorated with protest art and feminist posters. Like, genuinely viral. The combination of fake charity, displaced families, and wealthy developers who think they're untouchable? That's social media gold. We're going to trend. Good, I said, and meant it. I felt no hesitation, no second thoughts. Just a calm certainty that this was right, necessary, deserved. Have you told Daniel yet? Jenna asked carefully. I shook my head. He doesn't know. He thinks I'm just processing, thinking about our marriage. He's going to find out tomorrow, she pointed out, along with everyone else. And he's going to know you're behind it. I know. Are you ready for that? I met her eyes. I'm ready for whatever happens. Even if it means my marriage ends. Even if Daniel never forgives me. His parents tried to buy me out of his life like I was a problem to be solved. They need to understand that some problems fight back. Jenna studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You've changed, you know. Since that first meeting. You're harder, clearer. Like you finally figured out who you are. I did, I said simply. I figured out I'm someone who doesn't accept being diminished. Someone who fights for what's right, even when it costs me. Maybe especially when it costs me. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, the bed I'd shared with Daniel, that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and I thought about what tomorrow would bring. The posts would go live at 8 a.m. across all platforms. The articles would publish mid-morning. By noon, the story would be everywhere. And by evening, Richard and Patricia Walsh would understand exactly what they'd unleashed when they'd underestimated me. I wondered if Daniel would call. If he'd be angry, betrayed, or if some part of him would understand why I'd done it. I wondered if his parents would try to retaliate, if they'd send lawyers or private investigators or just try to bury the story with money and influence. But mostly, I wondered who I'd be on the other side of this. Whether destroying Daniel's parents would destroy my marriage. Whether I'd regret this choice or if it would be the moment I finally became fully myself. At 7:55 a.m. Friday morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone in hand. Jenna was online too, monitoring everything from her office. We'd set up a group chat with the displaced residents and the journalists, everyone ready to amplify and share. At exactly 8 a.m., the posts went live. The main Twitter account, @RealWalshFamily, posted a thread that started with, "Let's talk about Richard and Patricia Walsh of Seattle. Wealthy developers, society philanthropists, pillars of their community. Here's what they don't want you to know." The thread laid out everything methodically, the displaced families, the fake charity, the pattern of prioritizing profit over people. Each tweet included photos, documents, links to the full website. The final tweet read, "The Walshs want you to believe they care about community. But when community got in the way of luxury condos, they didn't hesitate to destroy it. This is who they really are." Instagram launched simultaneously with a carousel of infographics showing Patricia's charity finances, the $1.2 million raised versus the $147,000 spent on actual programs. The caption read, "When philanthropy is just a tax write-off and a social status symbol." TikTok went up with a video featuring Keisha Washington's testimony, edited to a haunting soundtrack. Within the first hour, it had 10,000 views. By the second hour, 50,000. I watched the numbers climb, watched the shares multiply, watched the comments roll in. Outrage. Shock. People tagging local news stations, tagging politicians, tagging anyone with influence. The Seattle Times article dropped at 10 a.m. with the headline, "Luxury Development's Hidden Cost, Families Displaced, Community Destroyed." The Portland Weekly followed at 11 a.m. with, "Society Philanthropists Charity, Big Parties, Small Impact." By noon, #Walsh Family Exposed was trending on Twitter. My phone rang. "Daniel." I answered. "Hello. What the fuck did you do?" His voice was raw, somewhere between fury and devastation. "Becca, what the fuck did you do?" "I told the truth," I said calmly. "About your parents. About their business practices. About the gap between who they pretend to be and who they actually are." "You destroyed them," he shouted. "Do you understand that? You've destroyed their reputations. My mother is having a breakdown. My father is threatening to sue everyone involved. You've destroyed my entire family." "They tried to destroy our marriage first," I countered. "They offered me money to leave you. They called me deceptive and inferior and not good enough. They treated me like garbage, and you let them. So yes, I fought back. I'm sorry you're hurt by it, but I'm not sorry I did it." "This is revenge," he said, his voice shaking. This is just petty, vindictive revenge because you're hurt. You didn't expose them because it was right. You exposed them because you wanted to hurt me. No, I said firmly. I exposed them because what they did was wrong. Because Margaret Chen lost her home. Because Keisha Washington was homeless with a toddler. Because your mother runs a fake charity that profits off pretending to help people. I exposed them because someone needed to, and no one else was going to do it. You should have talked to me, he said. You should have warned me this was coming. Why? I asked. So you could talk me out of it. So you could protect them. So you could choose them over doing the right thing, the same way you've chosen them over me again and again. Silence on the other end. Then, I can't forgive this. You've crossed a line I can't come back from. My parents, whatever their faults, they're still my parents. And you've made them into public villains. They made themselves into villains, I said. I just held up a mirror. I want a divorce, he said, and his voice was cold now, final. I'll have my lawyer contact you. Please don't fight it. Just let this be over. I felt something crack inside me, but my voice stayed steady. Okay. If that's what you want. It's what has to happen, he said. We can't come back from this. You know we can't. I know, I agreed. And I did know. I'd known it was possible since the moment I'd decided to go through with this. I'd chosen justice over my marriage, and now I had to live with that choice. For what it's worth, Daniel said quietly, I did love you. I do love you. But you're right about one thing. I'm not strong enough to be what you need. I'm not brave enough to cut off my parents, to stand completely on my own. And you deserve someone who is. It was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. Maybe the most honest thing he'd ever said. Take care of yourself, Daniel, I said. You too, Becca. He hung up. I sat there at my kitchen table, staring at my phone, feeling the weight of what I'd just lost. My marriage was over. 3 years of my life ended because I'd chosen to fight back against people who tried to diminish me. But I couldn't regret it. Even with my heart breaking, even knowing I'd be alone, I couldn't regret standing up for what was right. My phone buzzed again. A text from Jenna. We're at 500K impressions across all platforms. 3 more news outlets have picked up the story. You okay? I typed back, Daniel wants a divorce. Her response came immediately, I'm so sorry. Want me to come over? No. I need to be alone. But thank you. For everything. You're a goddamn warrior, Rebecca Walsh. Don't you forget it. I set down my phone and let myself cry. Not gentle tears, but the kind of sobbing that comes from somewhere deep and primal. I cried for my marriage, for the man I'd loved, for the version of myself who believed love was enough. I cried for Margaret and James and Keisha, for all the ways the world was unjust and cruel. I cried until I was empty, hollowed out, wrung dry. And then I stopped. Because I had work to do. The story was blowing up, yes, but now came the hard part, maintaining momentum, responding to media requests, making sure this didn't just become a one-day news cycle that everyone forgot by next week. I opened my laptop and started going through emails. Journalists wanting interviews. People sharing their own stories of being displaced by developments. Offers of support, donations for the affected families. And buried in there, one email that made me pause. It was from a law firm in Seattle. The subject line read, Walsh Development Corporation, Potential Class Action. I opened it. The lawyer, a woman named Helen Ortiz, explained that she specialized in housing rights and tenant displacement. She'd seen the story, had been moved by the testimonials, and wanted to explore whether there was grounds for a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the families who'd been displaced with inadequate compensation. If you're willing to connect me with the families who shared their stories, she wrote, and if they're interested in pursuing legal action, I'd be happy to take this on pro bono. These cases rarely make money, but they can force companies to change their practices. They can create accountability. I sat back, reading the email again. This was more than I'd hoped for. Not just public shaming, but actual legal consequences. Real accountability. I forwarded the email to Jenna with a note. Can you put Helen Ortiz in touch with Margaret, James, and Keisha? I think they'd want to hear what she has to say. Her response, already on it. This is incredible, Rebecca. You didn't just expose them. You might actually change how developers have to treat displaced residents in this state. That's legacy-level impact. Over the next several hours, I did interview after interview. Local radio stations. A podcast about economic justice. Even a brief segment on a Seattle news channel, done remotely via video call. I told my story carefully, focusing not on my personal grievances with the Walshs but on the systemic issues their case represented. Wealthy developers face almost no accountability when they displace communities, I said in one interview. They can offer token compensation, destroy people's lives, and face no consequences as long as they're technically following the law. But the law isn't enough. We need companies to be held to a higher standard, not just legal compliance, but ethical responsibility to the communities they impact. It felt good, using my voice this way. Not to diminish myself or make others comfortable, but to advocate for something bigger than my own hurt feelings. By evening, the story had been covered by national outlets. NPR did a segment on housing displacement. The New York Times ran an op-ed about performative philanthropy. Richard Walsh released a statement through his PR firm saying the company strives to follow all applicable laws and regulations and regrets any hardship experienced by former residents, which everyone immediately recognized as a non-apology that admitted nothing. Patricia Walsh was conspicuously silent. According to a friend of Jenna's who moved in Seattle society circles, she'd cancelled all her upcoming social commitments and was devastated by the public response. 2 board members of her charity had already quietly resigned. I should have felt triumphant. I'd accomplished everything I set out to do, exposed their hypocrisy, damaged their reputations, created consequences they couldn't buy their way out of. But mostly I just felt tired. Around 8 p.m., there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find my mother standing there, suitcase in hand. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "What do you think I'm doing?" she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "I'm not letting my daughter go through a divorce alone." I got on a bus as soon as I saw the news. "You're all over the internet, by the way. I'm very proud and also very worried about you." I burst into tears again, and she pulled me into a hug that smelled like the discount perfume she'd worn my entire childhood. "It's okay," she murmured. "You did the right thing, baby. Even if it hurt. Especially because it hurt. That's what courage looks like." She stayed with me that weekend, sleeping on the couch, making me eat when I forgot to, forcing me to talk about everything, the marriage, the divorce, the campaign, the future. We talked about my father leaving, about her years of struggle, about the choices we make and the prices we pay. "I know I taught you to be careful," she said Saturday night over takeout Thai food. "To save money, to have a backup plan, to never be vulnerable. And that was good advice, honey. It kept you safe. But there's a difference between being careful and being invisible. Between protecting yourself and making yourself small. You spent years being small for Daniel, and I'm proud of you for finally deciding to be big. Even if it cost me my marriage." "Especially because it cost you your marriage," she said firmly. "Some things are more important than staying married. Self-respect, for instance. Justice. The courage to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. Your marriage couldn't survive you being your full self? Then it wasn't a marriage worth saving." By Monday, I was back at work, facing the curious and concerned looks of my co-workers. Catherine pulled me aside immediately. "Rebecca, I saw the news. Are you okay? Do you need more time off?" "I'm okay," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. "It's been a difficult week, but I'm okay. Thank you for being flexible with me." "Of course," she said warmly. "And between you and me, what you did took guts. A lot of people in this city have been hurt by developers like the Walshs. You gave them a voice. The work week passed in a strange new rhythm. During the day, I processed insurance claims and answered phones. During lunch and breaks, I monitored the ongoing fallout from the campaign. The class action lawsuit was moving forward with 12 families signed on. Patricia Walshy's charity had lost 2 major donors and was facing an audit. Richard Walshy's company had 3 new permit applications delayed while city councils reviewed community impact concerns. It wasn't total destruction. The Walshs were still wealthy, still influential. But they'd been wounded, exposed, forced to face consequences. It was more than I'd hoped for. Daniel's divorce lawyer contacted me Thursday. The terms were straightforward, a clean split of our limited shared assets, no alimony requested on either side, a 60-day waiting period before it would be finalized. I signed the papers without argument, without trying to negotiate for more. I didn't want anything from Daniel except closure. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the campaign had launched, I sat on my couch with my mother and Jenna, drinking wine and watching the sun set through the apartment windows. "You know what's funny?" I said. "The Walshs offered me $75,000 to divorce Daniel. I turned it down. And now I'm getting divorced anyway, and all I'm walking away with is half of almost nothing." "You're walking away with something better than money," Jenna said. "You're walking away with integrity. And a hell of a story. And $50,000 they don't know about," my mother added with a wry smile. I'd finally told her about the secret account, about the full extent of my savings. She'd laughed until she cried. "What are you going to do with it?" Jenna asked. "The money, I mean. Now that you don't have to hide it anymore." I'd been thinking about that all week. Some of it I'll use to get established on my own, first and last month's rent on a new apartment, furniture, building a real life. But the rest. I think I want to create a fund. For families displaced by development projects. Help with relocation costs, legal fees, whatever they need. Make something good come out of all this. "The Rebecca Walsh Foundation for Displaced Families," Jenna said, raising her glass. "I love it." "Not the Rebecca Walsh Foundation," I corrected. "Just the Second Chance Fund, maybe. Something that isn't about me, but about helping people who need it." We clinked glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by the 2 strongest women I knew, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've made hard choices for the right reasons, from accepting consequences without regret. My marriage was over. My comfortable life was gone. But I'd found myself again, the woman I'd been building all along, the one who saved and planned and protected herself. The one who fought back when necessary, who demanded justice, who refused to be diminished. That woman was worth more than any marriage, any approval, any amount of money. That woman was finally, fully free. 6 months later, I stood in the living room of my new apartment, a small 1-bedroom in a different neighborhood, with better light and a view of the trees, and I barely recognized my life. The divorce had been finalized in early December, quiet and undramatic. Daniel and I had communicated only through lawyers, and I'd heard through mutual friends that he'd moved back to Seattle, accepting his father's job offer after all. Apparently, with their reputation damaged and several projects facing increased scrutiny, Walsh Development needed all the help they could get. Daniel had finally chosen his family, just not in the way any of us had expected. I didn't know how to feel about that. Some days I was angry that he'd proven me right about his weakness. Other days I just felt sad for him, trapped in the very life he'd spent years trying to escape. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. I was too busy building something new. The Second Chance Fund had launched in January with my initial $25,000 investment. Jenna had helped me set it up properly, forming a non-profit, getting the tax status sorted, creating a board of directors that included Helen Ortiz, the housing rights lawyer, and 2 of the displaced residents from the original Walsh Development story. We'd distributed our first grants in February, modest amounts, $3,000 to $5,000 each, to families facing displacement or struggling with inadequate relocation assistance. It wasn't much, not compared to the scale of the problem. But it was something. And it was growing. The publicity from the Walsh campaign had attracted donors, people who'd been moved by the story and wanted to contribute. We'd raised an additional $40,000 by March, and we were already discussing expanding to help families in other cities. I'd also been promoted at work. Catherine had created a new position, Patient Advocacy Coordinator, specifically for me, recognizing that my skills extended beyond just billing. I now spent half my time on the billing side and half helping patients navigate the complicated landscape of medical insurance, fighting denials, negotiating payment plans. It felt meaningful in a way my old job never had. I was using my knowledge of systems and bureaucracy to help people who'd been failed by those systems. The pay raise wasn't enormous, but it was enough that I felt comfortable, secure. I'd stopped hiding my financial situation, had even opened up to my co-workers about the savings I'd built. Several of them had asked for advice, and I'd found myself becoming an informal financial counselor, teaching other women how to build their own safety nets. My mother had moved to Portland permanently, finding a small studio apartment in my neighborhood with rent she could almost afford on her disability payments. I supplemented the rest, no longer hiding the help I gave her. We had dinner together twice a week, sometimes joined by Tyler, who'd completed his latest rehab program and was carefully building a sober life. "You seem different," Tyler said one evening in March as the three of us sat around my small dining table, eating the lasagna I'd learned to make from a YouTube video. "Lighter, maybe. Or just more yourself." "I think I finally figured out who myself is," I said. Turns out she was there all along. I just spent a lot of years trying to be someone smaller, someone more acceptable. "To Daniel," my mother said. It wasn't a question. "To everyone," I corrected. "To Daniel, to his parents, to society's expectations of what a woman should be. Quiet, manageable, grateful for whatever she's given. I'm done with that version." "Good," Tyler said. "That version was boring anyway. This version, the one who takes down wealthy assholes and starts charities, she's much more interesting." We laughed, and I felt the warmth of being fully known, fully accepted by the people who actually mattered. The Walsh family had largely disappeared from public view. Richard Walsh had stepped back from several high-profile projects, and Patricia had resigned from most of her board positions. The charity had dissolved entirely, its remaining funds distributed to actual service organizations. According to Jenna's society contacts, they'd become pariahs in their social circle, not completely ostracized, but definitely diminished. People whispered about them at parties, questioned their motives, treated them with suspicion rather than automatic deference. It wasn't complete ruin. They were still wealthy, still comfortable. But they'd lost something more valuable than money. They'd lost their reputation, their image as benevolent pillars of the community. Every time they tried to launch a new project or attend a social function, the stories resurfaced. The displaced families, the fake charity, the pattern of prioritizing profit over people. I'd given them a legacy they couldn't escape. In April, I started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and dinners, reminding myself how to be a person who existed independently rather than as part of a couple. It was strange at first, introducing myself as someone single, explaining my situation when people asked about my ring fingers tan line that had finally faded. But I was honest about what I wanted: companionship without pressure, connection without immediate commitment, space to figure out who I was as a single woman before trying to be a partnered one again. Some men were put off by that honesty. Others appreciated it. I was learning to spot the difference quickly, to value my own boundaries more than anyone's comfort with them. One of those coffee dates, in late April, was with a social worker named Eric who'd heard about the Second Chance Fund through his work with homeless families. He was younger than me by a year, with kind eyes and a dry sense of humor that made me laugh. We talked for 3 hours about housing policy, systemic inequality, and the challenges of doing meaningful work within broken systems. "You should be careful," he said toward the end of our conversation. "People like you, people who actually give a damn and try to make things better, you burn out fast. I've seen it happen over and over. The system grinds down the people trying to fix it." "I'm tougher than I look," I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I believe that. Anyone who takes on a developer family and wins isn't someone who gives up easily. We went on a second date the following week. Then a third. By May, we were seeing each other regularly, though I still maintained my boundaries about moving slowly. He respected that, never pushed, seemed genuinely content to build something at whatever pace felt right to me. You're different from anyone I've dated, he told me one evening as we walked along the waterfront, the same place I'd walked alone 6 months earlier after the lunch with Daniel's parents. Most people have walls, sure. But you have. I don't know, strategic defense systems. Like you're always 3 moves ahead, always planning for how things could go wrong. Is that a bad thing? I asked. No, he said thoughtfully. It's just interesting. You've been hurt, and instead of closing off completely, you got smarter. More careful. I respect that. I didn't tell him about the secret account yet, about the full extent of my financial planning and preparedness. But I thought maybe someday I would. When I was ready. When I trusted that showing him that part of myself wouldn't change how he saw me. In June, the class action lawsuit against Walsh Development reached a settlement. The company agreed to pay $2.3 million to be distributed among the displaced families, plus commit to improved relocation assistance standards for all future projects. It wasn't an admission of wrongdoing. The settlement specifically stated that, but it was acknowledgement that their practices needed to change. Margaret Chen used her portion of the settlement to move back to her old neighborhood, purchasing a small condo in a building that had survived the development. James Rodriguez put his toward his kids' education fund. Keisha Washington paid off debt and built up savings so she'd never be that close to homelessness again. Helen Ortiz called me personally to share the news. You started something important, she said. This settlement creates precedent. It makes it harder for developers to shortchange displaced residents. You've changed the landscape, Rebecca. We changed it, I corrected. All of us together. Take the credit, she said gently. You earned it. And don't let anyone tell you that revenge and justice can't be the same thing. Sometimes they are. Sometimes holding powerful people accountable for the harm they've caused is both. In July, on a warm evening when the city felt alive and full of possibility, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. My mother, Tyler, Jenna, Eric, Helen Ortiz, and several people from the Second Chance Fund board. We celebrated the settlement, the fund's 6-month anniversary, and the fact that we'd helped 23 families so far with relocation assistance. As I looked around my living room at these people, some I'd known for years, some I'd met through this journey, I felt something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Not for the pain, not for the betrayal, not for the divorce, but for the clarity it had given me. For the way it had burned away the parts of myself I'd been performing and left only what was real, essential, true. I'd lost my marriage, yes. But I'd found myself. I discovered I was capable of more courage than I'd thought, more strategic thinking, more righteous anger turned into productive action. I'd learned that being underestimated was a superpower if you knew how to use it. That sometimes the best revenge was simply refusing to be diminished, refusing to disappear quietly, refusing to accept that your worth was determined by someone else's perception. Speech. Jenna called out, raising her glass. Come on, Rebecca. Say something inspiring. I stood, feeling self-conscious but also proud. I'm not good at speeches, I started. But I want to say thank you. To all of you, for supporting me through the hardest year of my life. For helping me turn pain into purpose. For reminding me that I was never small or naive or less than. I just spent too long letting other people tell me I was. I paused, gathering my thoughts. A year ago, I was married to a man whose parents thought they could pay me to disappear. They offered me $75,000 to walk away from my marriage because they saw me as a problem that could be solved with money. And you know what? They were wrong about almost everything. But they were right about one thing. I did walk away from that marriage. Not because they paid me, but because I finally understood I deserved better. Better than a husband who wouldn't defend me. Better than in-laws who saw me as inferior. Better than a life where I had to make myself smaller to make everyone else comfortable. I looked around the room, at these faces I'd come to love and depend on. So here's to being big. To being loud. To being exactly as much as we are and refusing to apologize for it. Here's to the families we've helped and the ones we'll help in the future. And here's to the truth that sometimes the best way to move forward is to burn down what's behind you and build something better from the ashes. We raised our glasses, clinked them together, and in that moment I felt completely, powerfully free. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up, I found myself standing at my window, looking out at the city lights. I thought about Daniel, wondered if he was happy with his choice. Wondered if he ever thought about me, about what we could have been if he'd been braver, if I'd been honest sooner, if his parents had been different people. But those were hypotheticals, and I'd stopped living in hypotheticals. I lived in reality now, messy, complicated, sometimes painful reality. And in that reality, I was single, self-sufficient, and building something meaningful with my life. My phone buzzed. A text from Eric. Had a great time tonight. You're pretty amazing, you know that. I smiled, typed back, I'm learning to believe it. Good, he replied. Because it's true. Coffee tomorrow. Can't. I have a second chance fund board meeting. Dinner instead. Perfect. See you then. I set down my phone and looked at myself in the reflection of the window, not the scared woman in the Goodwill dress, not the angry one plotting revenge, but someone new. Someone who'd survived betrayal and come out stronger. Someone who'd turned her pain into purpose and her rage into justice. Someone who'd finally learned that the only person who could diminish her was herself. And I was done doing that. I thought about that hidden $50,000 that had started all of this, the secret that had represented both my fear and my strength. I didn't regret keeping it, even though it had been a lie by omission. It had saved me. It had given me options when I needed them most. It had been the difference between being trapped and being free. But I didn't need to hide anymore. I'd built a life where I could be fully myself, the careful planner, the strategic thinker, the woman who prepared for worst-case scenarios while hoping for the best. All of it was visible now, acknowledged, even celebrated. I'd never told Daniel about the other half of my savings. He died thinking I'd only had $25,000, never knowing I'd had twice that. It felt like the one secret I'd earned the right to keep. My insurance policy, my proof that I'd been smarter than everyone gave me credit for. And now that money was doing good in the world, helping families who needed it, creating change in ways that would have been impossible if I'd spent it all supporting a marriage that was always going to fail. Before I went to bed that night, I did one more thing. I logged into my email and sent a message to an address I'd found through some creative Googling, Patricia Walsh's personal email. The message was short, simple. Asterisk Mrs. Walsh asterisk. Asterisk I wanted you to know that the $75,000 you offered me to divorce your son? I've now raised more than that through the Second Chance Fund, and we've used it to help families your husband's company displaced. The irony isn't lost on me. Asterisk. Asterisk you thought you could make me disappear with money. Instead, I've used money to make sure the families you displaced don't disappear. I've used my voice to make sure people remember what your family did. Asterisk. Asterisk you were right about one thing. I wasn't good enough for Daniel. But not because I came from a working-class background or had a modest job. Because I had integrity, and in your world, that's apparently a liability. Asterisk. Asterisk I hope the settlement your company paid, the reputation you lost, and the legacy you'll carry teach you something you clearly never learned. People aren't disposable just because they're inconvenient. Everyone has value, everyone deserves dignity, and everyone, even women you consider beneath you, can fight back. Asterisk. Asterisk respectfully asterisk. Asterisk Rebecca Walsh asterisk. I hit send before I could overthink it, then closed my laptop. I didn't know if she'd read it. I didn't know if it would hurt her or just make her angry. But it didn't matter. The message wasn't really for her. It was for me. A final closing of the chapter, a last word on a story that had transformed my life. I climbed into bed, in my apartment, in my life, surrounded by evidence of who I'd become. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I fell asleep feeling not just safe, but proud. Proud of my courage. Proud of my choices. Proud of the woman I'd become when I'd finally stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight and possibility. To a life that was entirely my own, built on a foundation I'd constructed myself, protected by the strength I'd discovered in the breaking. I'd never told my husband about my hidden $50,000, and that secret had changed everything. It had given me options when I'd needed them most. It had protected me when my marriage fell apart. It had allowed me to build something meaningful from the ashes of my old life. But more than that, it had taught me the most important lesson of my life. The only person responsible for my security, my happiness, my future was me. Not my husband. Not my in-laws. Not anyone who thought they could control me with money or status or conditional love. Just me. And that knowledge, that bone-deep certainty that I could survive anything because I'd already survived the worst, was worth more than any amount in any account. Epilogue 2 years after that dinner with Daniel's parents, I was invited to speak at a housing advocacy conference in San Francisco. The Second Chance Fund had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. We'd helped over 200 families, raised more than $300,000, and inspired similar funds in 3 other cities. The Walsh Development Settlement had created legal precedent that was being cited in cases across the country. I stood on that stage in a navy blue suit I'd bought without guilt, my hair professionally styled, my voice steady and confident. I told my story, not all of it, but the parts that mattered. The displaced families. The fake charity. The campaign that had held powerful people accountable. I didn't mention the secret account. That part stayed mine. After the speech, a young woman approached me during the reception. She looked nervous, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a determination I recognized. "Ms. Walsh," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you. I'm in a difficult marriage, and I've been afraid to leave because I don't have any money of my own. But listening to you, hearing how you prepared and protected yourself, it made me realize I need to start doing the same thing. Building my own foundation." I took her hand, squeezed it gently. "Start small," I told her. $5 here, 10 there. Every choice you make to protect yourself is an act of courage. Every dollar you save is proof that you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. And when the time comes, if the time comes, you'll have options. That's the most powerful thing you can give yourself. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Did you ever regret it? Leaving your husband, exposing his family, blowing up your whole life?" I thought about that question carefully. About Daniel, who I'd heard was engaged to someone from his parents' social circle now, someone appropriate, someone they approved of. About Richard and Patricia Walsh, who'd never recovered their reputation but had retained their wealth. About my small apartment and my growing non-profit and Eric, who'd been patient and kind and was slowly, carefully becoming part of my life. "No," I said honestly. "I don't regret choosing myself. I only regret how long it took me to do it." That night, in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and logged into my accounts. The original secret fund was down to just a few thousand now. Most of it had been seeded into the Second Chance Fund. But I'd started rebuilding, saving again, because that's who I was. Someone who prepared, who protected herself, who never wanted to be vulnerable again. But I was also someone who'd learned that vulnerability and strength weren't opposites. That you could be both careful and courageous. That the armor you built to protect yourself didn't have to wall you off from the world. It could be the foundation you stood on when you decided to fight. I thought about all the women out there hiding money from partners who might not deserve their trust. All the people preparing exit strategies, building safety nets, doing what they needed to do to survive. Society called it dishonest, secretive, wrong. I called it wisdom. Because sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes trust has to be earned, not given freely. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. I'd never told Daniel about that money, and I'd probably carry that secret to my grave. But I told my story, the parts that mattered, the parts that could help other people. And that was enough. I closed my laptop and looked out at the San Francisco skyline, thinking about the woman I'd been 2 years ago. The one in the Goodwill dress, pretending to be poor to test her husband's loyalty. The one who'd been so afraid of being trapped that she'd built an elaborate cage around her heart. That woman had been smart, strategic, survival-minded. But she'd also been small, scared, constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The woman I was now? She was all of those things and more. She was fierce and funny and financially savvy and falling cautiously, carefully in love again. She was the director of a non-profit that actually helped people. She was a speaker, an advocate, a voice for families who'd been silenced. She was someone who'd looked at powerful people and said, "You don't get to define me." And she'd meant it. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want to thank you for listening, for bearing witness to my journey from hiding to fighting, from diminished to empowered, from scared to strong. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever had to hide parts of yourself to survive, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to choose between comfort and integrity, I hope it gives you courage. Courage to prepare, to protect yourself, to demand the respect you deserve. And if you're building your own secret fund, your own safety net, your own foundation of security that nobody knows about, keep going. That money isn't just currency, it's freedom, it's options, it's the knowledge that no matter what happens, you'll be okay. Don't let anyone shame you for protecting yourself. Don't let anyone tell you that real love requires complete vulnerability without earning complete trust. Don't let anyone convince you that being strategic is the same as being dishonest. You know your situation. You know what you need to survive and thrive. Trust that knowledge. Trust yourself. Because at the end of the day, the only person who's guaranteed to be there for you, no matter what, is you. Make sure you're someone you can count on. Thank you for watching this story. If you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about survival, revenge, justice, and women who refuse to be diminished, check the description box below. And please, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether my story resonated with you. I want to know I'm not alone. Take care of yourselves. Protect yourselves. And never, ever apologize for being exactly as much as you are.